The warmth of this whiskey does little to thaw the Siberian ice still clinging to my soul, even after all these years. The journalist across from me, a young woman named Anya Rostova, waited patiently, her recorder on the worn table between us. Its steady red light was a tiny, persistent beacon in the dim bar, a reminder that some truths, once spoken, could never be unsaid. "You understand, Anya," I began, my voice a low rumble against the ambient drone of the city, "that nothing I'm about to tell you is officially acknowledged. The government will deny every syllable." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm prepared for that, Dr. Thorne, but if what you claimed in your email is true, people deserve to know." I stared into my diluted glass, the amber liquid reflecting years of silence, years of nightmares, of wrestling with the choice to remain quiet. But pancreatic cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. When you're told you have months, not years, secrets become less burdensome than the truth. It started in February 2004. I was Dr. Aris Thorne, head of a specialized neurocognitive research team at the Advanced Projects Agency, focused on defensive countermeasures against emergent biological threats that could exploit or manipulate human consciousness. Not exactly the kind of work that made for light dinner conversation. This bar, tucked away in a quiet corner of Washington, was perfect for me. It catered to those who preferred to blend into the shadows, to forget their secrets with a drink. No one noticed another middle-aged man with tired eyes, grappling with a past that clung to him like a shroud. I received a summons, not an invitation, to a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon. No explanation, just a precise time and location in the Deering. When I arrived, two figures awaited me, a gaunt, unsmiling military officer and a woman from the National Security Council, her face a mask of polite indifference. They spoke of my expertise in psychotropic bioagents, specifically those developed by the Soviets during the Cold War. I remembered the fluorescent hum of that room, the stale air thick with unspoken urgency. They presented satellite imagery of a remote Siberian village, marked on maps as Veryansk, population 312, according to the last pre-collapse census. But the images revealed a disquieting stillness, unsettling movement patterns where none should be, and the stark outline of a military helicopter down just outside the village perimeter. Anya remained silent, her attention fixed on me, waiting. They then introduced me to the true nightmare, Project Nexus. A Cold War relic, the Soviets had pursued it in the late 1980s. Unlike conventional neurotoxins, Nexus strain, or NS, was designed not to kill, but to consume and integrate neural tissue, transforming victims into carriers, linking them into a shared, distributed consciousness. It was abandoned, they claimed, when Soviet scientists lost control of its spread. I took a sip of my scotch, wishing it could burn away the chill that settled deep in my bones. The Russians had reached out, an unprecedented gesture given the geopolitical climate. They had lost contact with a reconnaissance team dispatched to investigate Veryansk after thermal anomalies were detected by satellite. They wanted American expertise, and apparently I was the most qualified. I paused, remembering the precise moment my ordinary life ceased to exist. I was given 48 hours to prepare. The next day, I met the rest of the team at Andrews Air Force Base. Dr. Lena Petrova was waiting on the tarmac beside a massive C-17 Globemaster. Her file photo had been accurate, short, practical dark hair, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was an extremophile biologist from the CDC, with extensive field experience studying life forms in the most hostile environments on Earth. "Had you worked with her before?" Anya asked. "No," I replied. Our first conversation, though, had been unforgettable. Lena's clinical precision unnerving as she discussed potential fatality rates and environmental contagion vectors. Commander Valerius Val Kale, our military component leader, was a stark presence. He commanded a squad of 12 special operations operators, all cross-trained in biohazard response. Kale made it immediately clear. The mission was containment first, investigation second. No heroics, just surgical precision. The bar had grown quieter as the evening wore on. A few scattered patrons remained, none close enough to overhear my low, strained voice. The flight to Russia was an 18-hour crucible of tension and terse briefings. We were ostensibly a joint operation with Russian forces, but the air was thick with mistrust. Cold War habits died hard. I could still feel the drone of the cargo plane's engines, smell the hydraulic fluid and sweat. Halfway through the flight, Lena pulled me aside. She had more information than I'd been given at the Pentagon. Project Nexus wasn't just about linking hosts. It was about integrating them, absorbing their cognitive processes. It was a distributed consciousness, a collective mind that could learn, adapt, and grow with each assimilation. That sounds like science fiction, Anya interjected. So did splitting the atom once, I replied. The Soviets were thinking about biological warfare differently than we were. They wanted weapons that would leave infrastructure intact while eliminating resistance. Population control, not destruction. I looked down at my hands, surprised to find them steady after all these years. We landed at a military airfield near Yakutsk. The temperature was a brutal -30°C. Russian officers, grim-faced and stiff, greeted us. They transferred us to an M-8 helicopter, modified for Arctic conditions. That's when we met Sergeant Sergei Volkov, our Russian liaison. He was assigned to assist us, which everyone understood meant watch us. The memory of that helicopter ride remained sharp. The deafening rotor noise, the biting cold seeping through our thermal gear, and the palpable tension between American and Russian personnel. As we approached Veryansk, Kale gathered us for final instructions. He was direct: establish a perimeter, assess the situation, contain any biological threat. Lethal force was authorized against any compromised individuals who presented a transmission risk. I remembered Kale's face in that moment, not cruel but utterly practical in a way that unnerved me more than the Siberian air. We approached after nightfall. Through night vision goggles, I saw Veryansk for the first time. A cluster of buildings half buried in snow, some showing significant structural damage. No lights, no movement. The helicopter circled once before finding a clearing large enough to land. Anya leaned closer, completely focused now. As we prepared for touchdown, Kale came over to where Lena and I were checking our equipment. His face was devoid of emotion, his eyes flat and cold. I paused, hearing his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside him in the bar. "If either of you scientists shows any symptoms of exposure, I'll put you down myself," Kale had said. "We can't risk this reaching the outside world." "Did you believe him?" Anya asked. "I believed him completely," I replied. And when we stepped out into that Siberian night, I was grateful someone was willing to make that call if necessary. I finished my diluted scotch. The memory of that first step onto the snow-covered ground, the crunch of ice beneath my boots, remained vivid 15 years later. But none of us understood what we were truly walking into. Not even Kale the helicopter set us down in a small clearing about half a kilometer from Veryansk. The rotors kicked up a blizzard of snow that stung my exposed cheeks as I hunched forward, clutching my equipment bag against my chest. The noise of the engine wound down, replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. Kale was first out, scanning our surroundings through night vision goggles. He signaled the all clear, and we filed out into the Siberian night. The cold was intense, stealing my breath even through layers of thermal gear. The temperature readout on my wrist showed -32°C. "Move out," Kale ordered, his voice low but sharp. "Standard formation. Stay calm, maintain discipline." We trudged through knee-deep snow, our breathing creating ghost-like clouds that lingered in the still air. The moon hung low above the trees, illuminating the stark landscape. Each step was labored, the snow sometimes giving way unexpectedly, sometimes crusted with ice that broke with an unsettling crack. Lena walked beside me. Her movements were efficient, purposeful. "You've done this before," I whispered. "Sierra Leone was hotter," she replied simply, not breaking stride. About 20 minutes into our approach, Specialist Wang raised her fist, signaling ahead. She pointed to a dark shape partially buried in snow. The downed helicopter. Kale motioned to Harris and 2 other soldiers to secure the perimeter while we approached. The Russian M-8 helicopter lay on its side, rotors bent and shattered, the cockpit partially crushed from impact. No signs of fire damage. Volkov moved forward, examining the markings on the fuselage. "This is the reconnaissance team sent 2 weeks ago," he murmured, his voice tight. "Pilot Netsov, very experienced. Something must have happened." Kale directed his flashlight into the cargo hold. It was empty. No bodies, no equipment. "Blood here," Wang said, kneeling beside dark stains on the snow near the helicopter's side door. She pointed her light at a trail leading away from the wreckage, toward the village. Significant volume, multiple sources. The smears formed an uneven path, as if wounded survivors had dragged themselves or been dragged toward Veryansk. Kale studied the trail. We follow this in, maintain spacing. Daniels, Wang, rear security. Volkov, you're with me. Doctors, stay in the middle of the formation. We moved forward more cautiously now, following the blood trail that seemed impossibly preserved, even though there had been continuous snowfall in this region. Lena noticed it too. The blood trail should be covered, she said quietly. Weather reports showed regular snowfall for the past 2 weeks. Maybe it's recent, I suggested. No, Volkov interjected, his voice grim. This helicopter, its emergency transponder signal stopped 14 days ago. That silenced us. We continued forward, the knowledge that we were tracking 2-week-old blood through pristine snow adding to our profound unease. Dawn broke slowly, the horizon changing from black to purple to pale blue. The growing light revealed Veryansk ahead. Even from a distance, the destruction was evident. Several structures had been burned down to their foundations. Others showed significant structural damage, walls collapsed and roofs caved in. Possible artillery damage, Harris murmured, surveying the scene through binoculars. No, Volkov said, his voice flat. No military action authorized here. This is something else. As we reached the village outskirts, the first houses appeared, damaged and jagged against the snow. We paused at the perimeter, taking in details that became more disturbing the longer we looked. Even with the fresh snow layer, there were no footprints anywhere. Not a single track from villagers, animals, or the missing reconnaissance team. This isn't right, I said. There should be tracks, paths between buildings at minimum. It's like the snow fell and nobody's moved since, Lena added, her voice barely a whisper. What we did find, cutting through the unblemished snow, were wide, continuous marks, as if heavy objects had been dragged through the village. All of these drag marks oriented toward the center of Veryansk. Kale assessed the situation quickly. We're splitting into 3 teams. Harris, take Wang and Daniels, sweep the eastern sector. Jenkins, you're with Volkov and Crawford on the west. I'll take the doctors and the rest through the center. Radio check every 5 minutes. Any contact with hostiles or civilians, you report immediately. The teams separated, moving between the damaged buildings with weapons ready. The silence was intense. No birds called, no wind stirred the branches of the few stunted trees, and nothing moved except us. The only sound was the crunch of our boots compressing snow. Our central team moved methodically toward the village square. Approaching a small administrative building, we found the first signs of the missing Russian soldiers. Equipment lay scattered across the snow. Standard-issue gear, weapons, communications devices, all abandoned. Organized withdrawal doesn't look like this, Kale said, examining a perfectly functional rifle left behind. No brass casings, another soldier noted. No signs of a firefight. Lena had moved slightly away from the group, kneeling beside what I initially thought was a dark patch of ice. She was already pulling on extra gloves and removing collection equipment from her pack. Thorne, she called, her voice urgent. You need to see this. I joined her immediately, recognizing what had caught her attention. The dark mass frozen to the ground wasn't ice. It was organic matter, tissue that had partially liquefied and then refrozen. Lena carefully collected samples, placing them in specially designed containment vials. This is consistent with Nexus strain exposure, she stated, her voice tight with professional concern. The compound breaks down cellular structures, particularly in neural tissue, before reconstituting them into a modified form. Human, I asked. Yes, based on the cellular degradation pattern, I'd estimate exposure occurred roughly 2 weeks ago, aligning with the helicopter crash. Kale had been listening intently. He activated his radio. All teams be advised. We have confirmation of Nexus strain exposure. Switch to level 4 containment protocols, full face masks, no exposed skin. The radio crackled. Central, this is West Team. Jenkins has found something in the comms building. You should see this. We regrouped at a squat concrete structure that must have housed the village's communications equipment. Jenkins met us outside, his expression troubled behind his clear mask. It's on the walls, the ceiling. Nothing I've ever seen before. Inside, illuminated by our flashlights, a network of fibrous filaments covered the interior surfaces. They weren't mechanical wires. They were organic, resembling nerve fibers or blood vessels. They pulsed slightly, a rhythmic movement that suggested circulation or signal transmission. The fibers all connected, forming a complex network that converged toward a central point on the back wall. "Don't touch anything," Lena warned. Jenkins pointed to a collection of communication equipment. These were still running when we entered. Batteries should have died days ago. I think these fibers are drawing power somehow." The implications were chilling. Nexus strain was designed to rewrite neural pathways to connect infected hosts. What we were seeing was that process extended beyond bodies to the infrastructure itself. "Seal it," Kale ordered. "Nobody goes back in. Mark it for the containment team." As Jenkins and another soldier began sealing the building with specialized tape and markers from their packs, Kale gathered the team leaders to discuss our findings. "This isn't a simple outbreak," I said. "Nexus strain has established itself throughout the village. The missing people, the drag marks, I believe they've been collected, assimilated." "Assimilated for what purpose?" Kale asked. Before I could theorize, a sound cut through the silence. A wail, not quite human, not quite animal. It traveled across the village, rising and falling in a pattern that suggested multiple sources producing a unified, agonizing sound. Every head turned toward the source. At the center of the village stood a large wooden structure, the Orthodox Church, its onion dome still intact, even though everything around it was destroyed. Volkov crossed himself reflexively. "That is the Church of St. Nicholas, village gathering place." As we watched, the heavy wooden doors of the church visibly bulged outward, as if something massive inside was pressing against them, testing their strength. The wailing intensified, becoming more desperate, more hungry. "Whatever's happened to the villagers," Lena said quietly, "I think we found them, or what's left of them." The wailing rose to an unbearable pitch as we approached the church. Each step closer intensified the sound until it vibrated through my bones and set my teeth on edge. What had started as a mournful cry had transformed into something hungry and desperate, a collective voice that shouldn't exist. Kale halted us about 30 meters from the Orthodox Church's entrance. The wooden doors continued to bulge outward with rhythmic pulses. "Petrova, Thorn, you stay back," Kale ordered. "Volkov, what's the layout inside?" Volkov's face had gone pale beneath his mask. "Simple, one main worship area, small rooms in the back, and a bell tower above." Kale nodded, then motioned to his remaining soldiers. They moved with practiced precision, stacking up beside the entrance while we watched from behind a partially collapsed wall. My breath fogged the inside of my mask in rapid bursts. "On my mark," Kale said into his comm, his voice unnervingly calm. 3, 2, 1, breach. Harris kicked the doors open while two soldiers tossed in flashbang grenades. The deafening crack was followed by a momentary silence. Then a sound I still hear in my nightmares, thousands of voices screaming in perfect unison. The soldiers moved in, weapons raised. I couldn't see what they discovered, but their reactions told me everything. Wang stumbled backward, gagging. Jenkins vomited inside his mask. Harris simply froze, his weapon half lowered. "By all that's holy," Kale whispered over the comm. Against all training and common sense, I moved forward. Lena grabbed my arm, but I shook her off. I had to see, I had to understand. Nothing could have prepared me for what waited inside that church. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of human bodies had fused together into a single massive organism that filled the entire interior space. Limbs protruded at impossible angles, some elongated to twice their normal length. Faces emerged from the undulating flesh mass, some screaming, some silent with eyes that followed us. Torsos melded together in disgusting formations, skin stretched between bodies like webbing. The creature pulsed with hideous life, circulating fluids visible through semi-transparent tissue. At its core, where the altar should have been, a dense cluster of partially dissolved heads created a central node, their eyes moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a terrifying, unified intelligence. "The Gestalt," Lena whispered, having followed me to the entrance. "Nexus strain has connected them into a unified cognitive organism." "Everyone out," Kale shouted. "Fall back now," but it was too late. The mass moved with frightening speed. A limb, once human but now elongated and boneless, shot across the space and wrapped around Private Daniel's leg. He fired his weapon instinctively, bullets tearing into the appendage without effect. The creature pulled with impossible strength, dragging him toward the central mass. "Help me," Daniels screamed, clawing at the floor. Harris and Jenkins grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back, but 3 more tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Daniel's torso. His body lifted off the ground, suspended between his comrades and the Gestalt. Let him go, Kale ordered, opening fire on the tendrils. The bullets tore through flesh, but the wounds sealed behind their passage, the tissue regenerating almost instantly. Daniel's screams reached a crescendo as he was pulled from his comrade's grasp and into the central mass. His body began to dissolve on contact, uniform and equipment melting away, his features distorting as he was absorbed into the collective. The horror wasn't just physical, it was the chilling understanding that Daniel's mind, his identity, was being devoured, added to that sickening chorus. "Fall back," Kale shouted again, his voice strained. More tendrils shot out, faster than anyone could react. 3 more soldiers were caught, Crawford, Peterson, and Martinez. They fired wildly as they were dragged across the floor toward the mass, their screams joining the cacophony. Harris reached for his belt, pulling an incendiary grenade. "Cover," he yelled, yanking the pin. We ducked outside as he tossed the grenade into the center of the mass. The blast shook the building, and a wave of heat rushed through the doorway. The unified scream that followed shattered every window in the church, raining colored glass down upon us. When I looked up, the creature was burning, but still moving. It heaved its massive bulk through the rear wall of the church, brick and timber giving way as it forced its amorphous body through the opening. It dragged itself with surprising speed toward the tree line, leaving behind pieces of burning flesh that continued to move independently for several seconds before stilling. "Status report," Kale called out, his voice steady even after what we'd witnessed. "4 men down," Wung replied, her usual calm faltering. "Daniels, Crawford, Peterson, Martinez." Volkov crossed himself, murmuring what sounded like a prayer in Russian. I moved to the pool of fluid where the creature had been. Even though revulsion churned my stomach, I knelt and removed a collection vial from my pack. "Don't touch it directly," Lena warned, joining me with her own sampling kit. The liquid glistened with an oily iridescence, strands of tissue floating within it. As I collected a sample, I noticed how it seemed to reach toward the collection wand, responding to proximity like a primitive organism seeking contact. "It's still active," I said. "The Nexus strain is trying to connect." Lena nodded, sealing her samples. "This confirms everything. Nexus strain doesn't just infect, it networks its hosts into a unified system. The Gestalt isn't a random mutation. It's exactly what the Soviets designed the agent to do." Kale had joined us, his face grim behind his mask. "Can we kill it?" "Fire seems effective against smaller portions," Lena replied, "but the main mass appears capable of abandoning damaged sections and preserving the core intelligence." "We need to track it," I said. "Where it's going might tell us more about what it wants." Kale nodded. "Harris, Wung, secure the perimeter. Jenkins, get the remaining gear. We're moving out in 3 minutes." Outside, the thing had left an obvious trail. Dissolved snow and a path of fluid that killed vegetation on contact. We followed at a cautious distance, weapons ready. The trail led through the dense pine forest, winding between trees too narrow for the creature to have passed through intact. "It's changing shape," Lena observed, "adapting to its environment." After nearly a kilometer, the forest opened into a small clearing. The snow had melted in a perfect circle, approximately 30 meters in diameter. In the center stood a concrete structure, an entrance to what appeared to be an underground bunker. Its heavy metal door hung askew, partially open. Fresh drag marks led inside. "Soviet-era installation," Volkov said quietly. "Not on any maps I know." Kale surveyed our diminished team, 7 soldiers remaining plus Lena, Volkov, and myself. He activated his satellite communication device. "Command, this is Reaper 6. We have confirmation of Nexus strain deployment, resulting in Stage 4 contamination. 4 personnel lost. Target has retreated to an unmarked subterranean facility at coordinates Lima 73902. Request immediate extraction and containment team." The reply came through with significant static. "Reaper 6, acknowledge your situation. Extraction assets are 6 hours out minimum. You are ordered to pursue and neutralize the threat by any means necessary. Prevent spread at all costs. Command out." Kale looked at the bunker entrance, then back at what remained of his team. His expression didn't change, but I saw something in his eyes, not fear but the immense weight of responsibility. "You heard them," he said finally. "We're going in." I stared at the dark opening. Whatever waited below had already consumed an entire village and 4 highly trained soldiers. I tried to remind myself I was a scientist, that understanding this phenomenon was worth the risk. But as we approached the bunker entrance, all I could think about was Daniel's face as it dissolved into the mass, still conscious, still screaming. The bunker entrance stood before us, framed by rusted metal. Dusk made the clearing look darker, colder. With each step closer, the temperature seemed to drop, though whether from actual cold or my growing dread, I couldn't say. "Movement protocol," Kale said, his voice low but carrying clear authority. "Single file, 3-meter spacing. 1 point. Volkov after her for translation. I want no surprises." Jenkins distributed emergency light sticks, which gave off a sickly green glow. We activated our mask-mounted lights as well, which lit up the immediate darkness ahead. The corroded metal stairs led down at a steep angle, each step groaning beneath our weight. The air changed immediately. It smelled metallic, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of rotting fruit. My training told me to analyze these sensations objectively, but instinct told me something was profoundly wrong. 20 steps down, motion sensors detected our presence. Ancient fluorescent lights flickered to life, struggling against decades of neglect. Several burst from the sudden surge, showering sparks onto the concrete floor. Volkov stopped abruptly, staring at a large red sign mounted on the wall. Cyrillic letters, faded but still legible, covered its surface above a biohazard symbol. "What does it say?" Kale asked, tension evident in his voice. "Bioweapon Research Facility 16, Volkov translated, his expression hardening. "Authorized personnel only, Genetic Engineering Division." He turned to us, his face partially obscured by his mask but his eyes revealing genuine fear. This was not on any military maps, I know. Even KGB archives do not mention this place. "They wouldn't," I said. "Nexus strain was probably developed outside official channels. Even in the Soviet system, some projects were too dangerous for proper documentation." We continued deeper, entering a wide corridor lined with laboratory doors. Many stood ajar, revealing glimpses of abandoned workstations and specialized equipment. Everything had the practical, brutal design of late Soviet science. Functional, sturdy, with no concern for aesthetics. "Spread out," Kale ordered. "Teams of 2, secure and catalog, 10 minutes only." Lena motioned for me to join her in examining the first laboratory. Inside, the devastation was immediate and telling. Glass containment equipment shattered. Documentation scattered across the floor. Dried chemical stains marked the walls, patterns suggesting violent chemical reactions. "This wasn't abandoned in an orderly fashion," she noted, kneeling to examine a broken centrifuge. "They left in a hurry, or they didn't leave at all." I moved to a partially intact file cabinet, its top drawer hanging open. Inside, I found several leather-bound journals, their pages filled with handwritten notes in Russian, diagrams, and complex chemical formulations. Though I couldn't read the text, the molecular structures were recognizable to anyone with advanced biochemistry training. "These are Nexus strain research journals," I said, carefully placing them in my pack. "The base formulation appears to be derived from nerve agents, but with radical modifications to the delivery mechanism." Lena had moved deeper into the lab, her light illuminating what appeared to be an observation chamber separated by thick glass. Inside stood 6 metal beds, each equipped with heavy restraints. "Test subjects," she said quietly. "Human test subjects." The restraints were broken, torn from their moorings with force that would have required superhuman strength. Dark stains covered the beds and walls, patterns suggesting violent struggles. "This isn't just a research facility," I realized, connecting the evidence. "It's where they developed and tested Nexus strain on human subjects. Which means the Gestalt wasn't the first. They created others here," Lena concluded. "Earlier versions, failed attempts, or perhaps prototypes." Kale appeared at the doorway. "We've found something." "Next section." We followed him through a security checkpoint with a reinforced door hanging from one hinge. Beyond lay a wing labeled Observation in both Russian and English. This area contained dozens of cells, each with a viewing window and monitoring equipment. Most doors stood open, but the few that remained closed bore scratch marks on their interior surfaces. Long, deep gouges in metal that should have been impossible for human hands to create. "They were keeping them here," I said, observing the progression of infection outlined in some of the scattered data logs. Jenkins called from further down the corridor. "Sir, you need to see this." He stood before a large window overlooking a circular chamber 1 level below us. The room appeared to be a communal area, perhaps for more socially advanced experiments. The walls and floor were covered in the same organic filaments we'd seen in the church, which pulsed with a subtle rhythm. "It's spreading," Wang observed. "The agent is integrating with the facility itself." Before anyone could respond, a sound traveled through the corridors. Scraping, shuffling footsteps, approaching from multiple directions. Kale signaled for silence, directing us into defensive positions with practiced hand motions. They emerged from connecting corridors and maintenance shafts, human figures moving with unnatural coordination. Unlike the fused mass of the Gestalt, these were individual bodies, yet clearly altered by Nexus strain. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface. Their movements were jerky but purposeful, heads tilting in perfect unison as they spotted us. "Infected villagers," Lena whispered, "and possibly the Russian reconnaissance team." I counted at least 15 approaching from various directions. Their eyes tracked us with an intelligence that seemed collective rather than individual. When one tilted its head to observe us, all others mimicked the action precisely. "They're networked," I said. "Independent bodies sharing a unified consciousness." "Can we neutralize them?" Kale asked, weapon raised. Before Lena could answer, the infected launched their attack, not with wild aggression, but with disturbing coordination. They moved in formations, some advancing directly while others circled to flank us. Their tactics suggested military training, or at least access to such knowledge. "Open fire," Kale ordered. The soldiers' weapons roared in the confined space. The infected in front collapsed under sustained fire, but those behind simply stepped over fallen bodies, maintaining their advance without hesitation. Most disturbing was their lack of defensive instinct. They made no attempt to take cover or avoid bullets. "They're not trying to kill us," Kale realized after several minutes of engagement. "They're trying to overwhelm us, capture us, to absorb us." He was right. The infected that reached our position attempted to grab rather than harm us. When Harris shot one directly through the chest, it continued forward, arms outstretched, until a headshot finally stopped it. "Central nervous system destruction only," Harris called out, adjusting his aim. We established a defensive perimeter in an intersection of corridors, using overturned metal tables as barricades. I took the opportunity to examine a facility map mounted on the wall nearby, its plastic surface cracked but still legible. "There's a main storage vault 2 levels below us," I reported, tracing the layout with my finger. "It's connected to this level by a freight elevator at the end of this corridor." "That's where it went," Lena said, reloading her sidearm. "The Gestalt, it's seeking something in that vault." "Then that's where we're going," Kale decided. "Wang, Jenkins, clear a path to the elevator. Everyone else covering fire. 5-second intervals, leapfrog pattern." We moved as instructed, 2 soldiers advancing while others provided cover, then rotating positions. The infected continued their coordinated assault, seeming to anticipate our tactics, adjusting their own approaches accordingly. "They're learning," I told Kale as we paused behind a barricade. "Adapting to our methods." "Then we change the pattern," he responded. "Harris, Wang, ceiling check." The warning came too late. As Harris looked up, infected dropped from access panels above, having used maintenance crawl spaces to position themselves. One landed directly on Harris, its elongated fingers wrapping around his exposed wrist where his glove had separated from his sleeve during combat. "Contact," Harris shouted, struggling to push the creature away. Wang was beside him instantly, her combat knife slashing through the infected's throat. She pulled Harris free, but we all saw it. The blue discoloration spreading up Harris's arm from the point of contact, veins visibly darkening as the agent entered his bloodstream. "I'm hit," Harris said calmly, staring at his arm. The infection progressed with horrifying speed, blue lines racing toward his shoulder. "Keep moving," Kale ordered, but his eyes met Harris's with an understanding passing between them that needed no words. We fought our way to the elevator, a massive freight platform designed to transport heavy equipment. Jenkins activated the controls while the rest of us held the infected at bay. As the doors began to close, Harris stepped back, remaining in the corridor. "Harris, move your ass," Kale shouted. "Can't do that, sir," Harris replied, his voice eerily steady despite the blue veins now visible on his neck. "You know the protocol for exposure." Kale hesitated, an emotion I couldn't identify briefly crossing his face. "Sergeant, I'll hold them off," Harris interrupted. "Complete the mission." He looked at each of us, his eyes still his own despite the infection visibly climbing his face. "It's been an honor." Wang tried to reach for him, but Jenkins held her back as the doors continued closing. "Give me your sidearm, sir," Harris said to Cale. Cale drew his pistol and passed it through the narrowing gap without hesitation. "Godspeed, Sergeant," he said softly. As the elevator doors sealed shut and we began our descent, a single gunshot sounded through the shaft, the noise bouncing off metal walls before fading into silence. Wang stared at the closed doors, her normally composed expression cracked with grief. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The elevator continued its descent for what felt like minutes, but was likely only 30 seconds. When it finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal level 3. A vast circular chamber that looked like something from a science fiction film rather than Soviet-era construction. Hundreds of fluid-filled containment tubes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each connected to a central hub by pulsing organic filaments similar to those we'd seen throughout the facility. Most tubes contained a blue luminescent liquid, while others had shattered, their contents either evaporated or pooled on the floor. The room was lit by a pervasive blue glow from the intact containers, creating dancing shadows that moved even when we stood still. At the center of the chamber stood a single figure, a man in a Soviet military uniform that appeared decades old, yet perfectly preserved. His skin was almost transparent, blue veins visible throughout his body, pulsing with the same luminescence as the containment tubes. He stood perfectly still, watching us with eyes that glowed from within. "Welcome, Americans," he said, his voice resonating with unnatural harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I've been waiting for someone worthy of witnessing what we've created here." The man smiled, revealing teeth that glowed the same unnatural blue as his veins. Something about his confidence, his complete lack of fear despite facing armed soldiers, chilled me more than any horror we'd encountered thus far. "Who are you?" Cale demanded, weapon raised. "Someone who has transcended your limited understanding of human potential," the figure replied. "But you may call me Director Krellin. I once commanded this facility. Before I became something more." The man smiled with unnatural calmness. Every movement he made, even the slightest tilt of his head, sent ripples through the organic filaments connecting him to the room. It was terrifying. It looked like he somehow controlled the entire chamber. "My American counterparts," he said, his perfect English carrying a faint Russian accent. "I've waited decades for an audience worthy of witnessing what we've achieved here." "Identify yourself," Cale commanded, his weapon trained squarely on the figure's head. "Director Mikhail Krellin, former Soviet Army, lead scientist on Project Nexus, though former feels inappropriate now. The Soviet Union collapsed, but I went beyond it." He looked at us with glowing blue eyes that seemed to see through rather than at us. "You've come seeking Nexus strain. How disappointing that your government sent so few to retrieve something so precious." I forced my voice to remain steady. "We're not here to retrieve anything. We're investigating an outbreak." "An outbreak?" Krellin's laugh rang unnaturally through the chamber. "Such a clinical term for evolutionary advancement. Your language betrays your limited perception." "What happened here?" Lena asked, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. Krellin moved toward us with a fluid grace that defied natural human movement. Each soldier tensed, fingers tightening on triggers, but Cale signaled them to hold. "The Soviet Union was crumbling around us in 1989, Krellin began, his face contorting briefly with remembered rage. "Decades of research, billions in resources, all to be abandoned or, worse, surrendered to the West. Nexus strain was too important, too revolutionary to become another American weapon." "So you preserved it," I said, the horrible truth dawning on me. "Better," his smile widened. "I became it. The perfect symbiosis of creator and creation." He gestured to the containment tubes surrounding us. I injected myself with the master strain and entered cryostasis. The facility was sealed, all records purged. I slept while my body changed, while Nexus strain rewrote my cellular structure and neural pathways. "Until the Russian reconnaissance team woke you," Cale noted. "An unfortunate surprise for them, yes. Simple soldiers following orders, checking abandoned Cold War facilities. They couldn't comprehend what they found." Krellin's expression softened with false sympathy. Their confusion was regrettable, but necessary for my adaptation to this new era. I stared at the pulsing filaments connecting Krellin to the chamber, following their path to the dozens of containment tubes and back to his body. Each pulse sent a wave of blue luminescence through the network, moving with steady, rhythmic beats. "You're the central nervous system," I whispered as I suddenly understood. The Gestalt, the infected villagers, you're controlling all of them. Control implies domination. I prefer guidance, Krellin spread his arms. I share my consciousness with them. They become extensions of me, and I of them, a unified mind spread across multiple bodies. The implications were huge. Nexus strain hadn't just created infected hosts, it had created a distributed consciousness with Krellin at its center. Every infected person, every changed villager or soldier, wasn't just connected to Krellin. They were Krellin, extensions of his will, contributing their own experiences and knowledge to his ever-growing intellect. You deliberately infected the village, Lena realized aloud. I needed to understand modern humans. Things have changed in 15 years. Krellin stepped closer, his movements eerily smooth. But the fundamentals remain the same. Humanity still lives divided, fighting meaningless battles over arbitrary boundaries. I've solved that problem. No more nations, no more wars, one mind, one purpose. Wang moved her position slightly to cover Lena. Krellin's glowing eyes flicked to her, his head tilting with predatory interest. You disapprove, Specialist Wang. He spoke her name with an intimate knowledge that chilled my blood. I can feel your resistance from here. Your mind is disciplined, focused, and sharp. You would make an excellent addition to our collective. Stay back, Wang warned, raising her weapon. Krellin smiled. Your friend Harris is already joining us. His resistance was admirable, but ultimately futile. Even now, his knowledge and training integrate with our consciousness. The mention of Harris's name sent a visible shock through the team. Kale's jaw tightened, but his aim never wavered. That's enough, he said. You're coming with us for containment and study. Krellin's expression changed to something between amusement and pity. Americans, always believing they can control what they don't understand. What happened next occurred too quickly for human reaction. Krellin moved with impossible speed. One moment standing 3 meters away, the next directly beside Wang. His elongated fingers wrapped around her head before she could fire a single shot. A quick, efficient twist. The sickening crack of her neck breaking resonated through the chamber. Wang's body crumpled to the floor as Krellin stepped back, moving so fast he seemed to blur. Open fire, Kale shouted. The room erupted with gunfire. Bullets tore through Krellin, but his body rippled like water with each impact, the wounds sealing instantly. Blue fluid sprayed out and then flowed back into him. He wasn't dodging. He was phase-changing, his molecular structure temporarily dispersing and then reforming. The tubes, Lena shouted, pointing to the containment vessels. They're full of concentrated nexus strain. That's his power source, his connection to the network. Krellin's expression hardened. He lunged toward Jenkins, moving so fast he appeared to teleport. Jenkins emptied his magazine but couldn't stop Krellin's attack. The director's hand plunged into Jenkins's chest, blue veins immediately spreading through his body. Jenkins screamed as his skin began changing, becoming translucent, his veins glowing with the same blue luminescence as Krellin's. Target the containers, Kale ordered, redirecting fire toward the glass tubes lining the walls. Bullets shattered several containers, releasing pressurized blue fluid that ignited on contact with air. The flames burned with an unnatural blue intensity, consuming organic filaments and sending Krellin staggering backward. Yes, Lena shouted. The agent is flammable in concentrated form. Krellin roared, a sound that contained multitudes of voices, as if the entire Gestalt screamed through him. He gestured sharply, and more infected appeared from adjoining corridors, moving with the same coordinated precision we'd seen earlier. You cannot stop evolution, Krellin said, his voice deepening as more nexus strain leaked into the chamber. Instead of avoiding the fluid, he absorbed it through his skin, growing visibly stronger. His body began to change, limbs elongating, fingers extending into blade-like appendages. 2 more soldiers fell, overwhelmed by infected villagers while trying to destroy the containment tubes. Lena moved to help Crawford, only to be thrown against a wall by Krellin's elongated arm. She collapsed, blood seeping through her protective suit at the shoulder. Lena, I shouted, rushing to her side. I'm all right, she gasped, though clearly she wasn't. The containers. We need to destroy the central hub. Everything connects there. I helped her to a defensive position behind an overturned console as Kale and Volkov provided covering fire. The chamber was changing around us. The released agent merging with Krellin, enhancing his abilities. He moved faster, hit harder, his body becoming less human with each passing second. "There are too many containers to shoot individually," Kale shouted over the gunfire. "We need something bigger." Volkov checked his ammunition, then his pack. His expression changed as he realized something, a grim determination settling over his features. He caught my eye from across the chamber, and I saw his decision before he voiced it. "Dr. Thorne," he called, "tell my daughter I did not die for nothing." "Yes, Sergei, what are you?" He was already removing the charges from his backpack. "The same thermite explosives we brought to ensure containment if necessary." He activated the detonator, the light blinking red against his blood-soaked uniform. I hadn't even noticed he'd been wounded, a deep gash across his torso, leaking blood with each labored breath. "Get to elevator," Volkov ordered. "I finished this." Kale understood immediately. "Everyone pull back now." Krellin noticed the change in our strategy. He turned toward Volkov, but was momentarily distracted when Kale emptied his magazine into more containment tubes, creating a wall of blue flame between Krellin and our escape route. I helped Lena toward the elevator while Kale covered our retreat. Volkov remained behind, detonator clutched in his hand, charges secured to his body. "Sergei," I called. "There has to be another way. No time for a better plan." He smiled grimly. "This is good death, soldier's death." Krellin lunged toward us, cutting through the flames as if they were merely an inconvenience. Volkov waited until the last possible moment, until Krellin was almost upon him. Then he rushed forward, tackling the change director into the central containment hub, where the highest concentration of Nexus strain was stored. "For Russia," Volkov said, his finger pressing the detonator. The explosion was blinding, a concentrated fireball that consumed the central hub in milliseconds. The pressure wave knocked us backward into the elevator as chain reactions ignited each connected container. Blue flames engulfed the chamber, feeding on the organic filaments, racing through the network Krellin had created. Kale slammed the elevator control panel, the doors closing just as secondary explosions began. Lena leaned heavily against me, her breathing shallow, blood soaking through her uniform. "Facility's self-destruct system," she murmured. "Soviet failsafe for containment breach." A computerized voice confirmed her assessment, Russian announcements followed by a countdown blaring through the facility's speakers. The elevator surged upward, the shaft around us shuddering as explosions continued below. "We're not going to make it," I said, watching the floor indicators crawl past too slowly. "Yes, we are," Kale replied with absolute certainty, checking Lena's wound. "Apply pressure here," I pressed against the bleeding as instructed, while Kale prepared his weapon for whatever might await us above. The elevator groaned, straining against mechanical failures as the facility began systematically destroying itself. When the doors finally opened on the ground level, we moved as quickly as Lena's injury allowed. The bunker was already collapsing, ceiling panels crashing down, support beams buckling under structural damage. Behind us, blue flames raced through conduits, consuming everything connected to Krellin's network. We stumbled out of the bunker entrance just as the final countdown ended. The ground beneath us heaved violently, throwing us forward into the snow. I covered Lena with my body as the bunker imploded, the entrance collapsing inward with a deafening roar. A shockwave of cold air rushed over us, carrying dust and debris. Then silence. We lay in the snow, gasping for breath, our bodies outlined against the remains of the facility. Above us, the night sky was clear, stars shining brightly. No sign remained of Krellin, the Gestalt or Nexus strain, nothing but a collapsed crater where the bunker entrance had been. Kale recovered first, checking Lena's wound before activating his emergency beacon. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the stars as my adrenaline slowly dropped. We had survived, but at what cost? Wang, Harris, Volkov, Jenkins, and the others all gone. And who could say for sure that Krellin's consciousness had truly been destroyed? The Siberian night was quiet around us. In the distance, a wolf howled, ordinary, natural, and untainted. That sound comforted me as we waited for extraction. 3 survivors in the snow, the extraction team found us at dawn. Their helicopters cut through the morning mist, rotors breaking the quiet that had surrounded us since the facility's collapse. I remained motionless in the snow, my body numb from both cold and mental shutdown. The Siberian forest around us seemed very peaceful after what we'd seen underground. None of us had spoken much during those long hours of waiting. Kale had maintained a vigilant watch, keeping his weapon ready even though he was exhausted. Lena had drifted in and out of consciousness, her shoulder wound temporarily stabilized but needing proper medical attention. I'd simply stared at the sky, trying to convince myself that the nightmare was truly over. Movement, Cale announced as the first helicopter approached. His voice was raw, stripped of everything but essential function. I didn't react. Part of me wondered if it even mattered anymore, if Krellin's consciousness had somehow survived. If even a trace of Nexus strain remained intact, extraction might simply spread the infection. But I lacked the energy to voice these concerns. The medical team reached Lena first, their skilled movements very different from our stillness. I watched without emotion as they secured her to a stretcher, noticing how professional they were. When they approached me with thermal blankets and assessment questions, I responded mechanically, my voice not sounding like my own. "Any direct contact with biological agents?" a medic asked, checking my pupils with a penlight. "No," I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. Everything after the explosion blurred together in my memory. Cale was the last to board, scanning the collapsed bunker entrance one final time before climbing into the helicopter. As we lifted off, the sunrise lit up the impact crater where Krellin and his creations had disappeared. From above, it looked almost small against the huge Siberian landscape. No visible evidence remained of the horrors beneath. The flight to the extraction point went by quickly. Military doctors worked on Lena while giving us all preliminary decontamination procedures. I saw Cale speaking into a satellite phone, his face blank as he delivered what I thought was a preliminary report. I couldn't hear his words over the rotor noise, but his tight jaw and precise gestures told me he was sticking to basic facts, separating the parts of our mission that couldn't be easily explained. We were transferred to a medical transport plane at a remote airfield. The crew wore level 4 containment suits, treating us as potential biohazards, even though we had initial clearance. Their caution made sense, but it was profoundly disturbing. The plane's interior had been converted into an isolation unit with separate compartments for each of us. "Where are we going?" I asked as a doctor connected monitoring equipment to my arm. "Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany," she replied through her mask. "You'll undergo full quarantine and debriefing there." I nodded and leaned back on the gurney. Germany, not American soil. I recognized the protocol. They wouldn't risk bringing us home until they were completely sure we carried no trace of Nexus. The next 2 months were filled with repetitive tests, interrogations, and psychological evaluations. We were housed in an isolation wing of the military hospital. Our interactions limited to medical staff and intelligence officers, blood tests, tissue samples, brain scans. They monitored us for any sign of infection or neurological abnormalities. Each day brought the same set of questions from different interrogators, as if they hoped inconsistencies might emerge in our accounts. I saw Lena only during scheduled debriefing sessions. Her shoulder wound had been treated successfully, but she moved more carefully now, her previous confidence replaced by constant watchfulness. Cale maintained his military bearing throughout, answering questions efficiently and without emotion. During the 6th week of quarantine, I was awakened by nightmares for the 3rd consecutive night. In my dreams, Krellin's blue-veined hand reached through my chest, his voice whispering about evolution and unified consciousness. I gasped awake to find myself clawing at my own skin. "The dreams are a normal trauma response," the staff psychologist told me the next morning. She sat across from me in the small interview room with her clipboard. "All 3 of you are exhibiting classic PTSD symptoms." "There's nothing classic about what we experienced," I replied. She made a note without looking up. "Have you considered that your recurring nightmare might represent feelings of violation, that the boundary between self and other was literally threatened during your encounter?" I nearly laughed at the clinical reduction of our experience. How could I explain that my fear wasn't symbolic, that somewhere in my hindbrain I couldn't shake the possibility that Krellin's consciousness might find a way to persist, to reach out, to continue what he'd started? When clearance finally came, we were assembled in a conference room for our final briefing. A collection of senior military officers and intelligence officials waited around a long table. At the head sat a brigadier general whose name tag identified him as General Hargrove. "You've all been medically cleared," Hargrove began without preamble. "No trace of biological contamination has been detected. However, the security classification of Operation Nexus remains at Omega level." He slid folders across the table to each of us. Inside mine was a heavily redacted mission report and a non-disclosure agreement that covered several pages. The official record will show that a training accident during a joint US-Russian military exercise resulted in the deaths of 9 American and 4 Russian personnel, Hargrove continued. The nature of Nexus strain and Director Krellin's research remains classified indefinitely. A training accident, Lena repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. 13 people died. An entire village was destroyed. Officially, Veryansk remains an uninhabited location on Soviet maps, one of the intelligence officers interjected. The Russian government has agreed to maintain this position. You're hiding the truth, I said, anger finally breaking through my emotional shutdown. Hargrove's expression hardened. We're containing a threat, Dr. Thorne. Public knowledge of Nexus strain would create panic and potentially inspire similar research by hostile actors. The best defense against biological weapons is often secrecy regarding their existence. I wanted to argue further, but the fatigue of the past 2 months had worn me down. Instead, I signed the papers, knowing refusal would likely result in indefinite observation for my own safety. As we prepared to leave, Cale approached me in the hallway. His face showed subtle changes I hadn't noticed before. New lines around his eyes, a perpetual tension in his jaw. They're watching us, he said quietly. They'll always be watching us. Do you think it's really over? I asked. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I think we did our job. The rest isn't our concern anymore. It was the answer of a soldier who'd learned to compartmentalize, to accept that some questions didn't have satisfying answers. I envied his discipline, even as I felt sorry for what it cost him emotionally. We parted without ceremony. Cale received orders for Pentagon intelligence, along with a promotion to full colonel. Lena accepted a position with the World Health Organization's Biosecurity Division. I returned to the Advanced Projects Agency, to my old lab and my old projects. As if nothing had changed for 6 months, I tried to resume my previous life. I analyzed threat assessments, reviewed defensive countermeasure proposals, attended the same tedious budget meetings. But everything had changed. Each time I entered a lab, I saw Krellin's makeshift experiments. Each time I reviewed a biological agent report, I remembered the thing in the church. Hundreds of humans fused into a single organism, faces still conscious, still screaming. My resignation letter was brief. My supervisor accepted it with visible relief. I'd become a difficult presence, questioning protocols and research applications that previously wouldn't have troubled me. I transitioned to private consulting work, choosing projects that focused on medical applications rather than weapons development. The years passed. I learned to live with the nightmares, to see them as trauma effects rather than premonitions. I maintained sporadic contact with Lena, exchanging research papers and occasional conference calls that carefully avoided direct mention of Veryansk. Cale disappeared into the intelligence community. My attempts to reach him went unanswered. 15 years lessened my fears, though they never fully disappeared. When I received my cancer diagnosis 6 months ago, my first reaction was perverse relief. At least I would die a natural death, my consciousness wholly my own, until the end. Is that why you're breaking your silence now? Anya asked, pulling me back to the present moment. Because of your diagnosis, I studied my watered-down Scotch, aware of how my story must sound to someone who hadn't been there. Partly, when you know your time is limited, priorities change. The bar had emptied further during my account, the late hour clearing out all but the most dedicated drinkers. Anya hadn't touched her drink since I'd begun describing our escape from the facility. You mentioned Dr. Petrova contacted you recently, she prompted. I nodded, leaning forward slightly. Last month, after years of careful, encrypted communication, she sent me a message that broke all our established protocols. She'd been working at a WHO monitoring station near the Kazakhstan-Russia border. Her team detected biological anomalies in soil and water samples. Cellular structures that responded to proximity, that tried to connect even though they were separated. Anya's expression remained neutral, professional, but I noticed her grip tighten slightly on her pen. She disappeared 3 days after sending that message. Official report says she abandoned her post, took accumulated leave without proper notification, but she sent me something before vanishing. I lowered my voice further. Classified documents suggesting Nexus strain was developed at multiple Soviet sites, not just Veryansk. Krelin's facility was apparently one part of a larger program, codenamed Razum, Russian for consciousness. And you believe these other development sites might still contain active samples? Anya asked. I don't know, I admitted, but the timing concerns me, especially given what happened to Kale. Lieutenant Colonel Kale, I corrected. He was found dead in his apartment last week. Official report calls it suicide, gunshot wound to the head. You don't believe that? I stared at my drink. Kale was many things, but suicidal wasn't one of them. He was a survivor, a pragmatist, and he'd recently requested access to files related to Soviet bioweapons sites in Central Asia. Anya remained silent, waiting for me to continue. I can't prove anything, I said. But the coincidences are troubling. Lena discovers anomalies, sends me classified information, and disappears. Kale investigates similar leads, ends up dead. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a small metal case. Inside was a flash drive, unmarked except for a small scratch on its surface. This contains everything, I said, sliding it across the table. My notes from Veryansk, Lena's recent findings, copies of Kale's file requests, and satellite imagery of the Kazakhstan sites Lena was monitoring. Anya hesitated before taking it. Why me? Why now? Because I'm not going to survive this cancer. Because everyone who witnessed what happened in that Siberian village is either dead or disappeared. Someone needs to know what's out there before all of us who remember are gone. I drained the last of my scotch, the watered-down alcohol barely registering on my palate. The official records say Operation Nexus ended in that collapsed bunker 15 years ago. Maybe it did. Maybe I'm just a dying man connecting unrelated dots. I met Anya's eyes directly. But if I'm right, what happened in Veryansk was only the first chapter, and whatever's emerging now has had 15 years to evolve. Anya carefully pocketed the flash drive. I'll need to verify these claims independently. You understand that? I'd expect nothing less, but be careful who you contact. The people who covered up this story the first time are still in power. We finished our conversation shortly after. I paid the bill and watched Anya leave, wondering if I'd just endangered another life by sharing what I knew. Outside the bar window, Washington continued its evening rhythms, unaware of the horror that might be returning half a world away. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. I looked gaunt, with prematurely gray hair and haunted eyes. Cancer had thinned me further, but the real deterioration had begun in that Siberian forest 15 years ago. I'd left something essential behind in that collapsed bunker, some fundamental faith in human nature and scientific purpose that could never be recovered. I walked out into the night air, breathing deeply, even with the city pollution. Whatever happened next would unfold without me. I'd done what I could, shared what I knew with someone who might use it wisely. Whether anyone would believe it, whether anyone could stop what might be coming, was beyond my control now. The city lights blurred around me as I headed toward my hotel. Behind me, the bar's neon sign lit up the sidewalk with a faint blue glow, not so different from the luminescent blue that had pulsed through Krelin's veins, or the echoes of voices that sometimes whispered from the depths of my own mind. I quickened my pace, leaving the light behind, focusing on the solid concrete beneath my feet rather than the dark alleys around me. What part of this chilling account resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts below. My nerves were wound as tight as a drum as I paced back and forth along the wall of the old fence, eyes watching the shadows carefully. The chill of the room, the chill of the night, was beginning to bite at me, though I barely noticed it through my anxious anticipation. Then Marcus's voice, abrupt and sharp, cut through the calms. Guys, I think I see something. There's a shimmer in the air in front of me, near where the old factory is." My heart raced. "What does it look like, Marcus?" Like heat waves, only it's anything but warm out here. And there's a sort of glow to it, almost like bioluminescence." "Stand fast," Leo's voice commanded. "Do not attempt to approach it if it is not moving towards the inhabited zones." I clenched my UV flashlight with my other hand, feeling the cold sweat of my palms even in the sub-zero chill. "This was it, they were here as well," Clara said, her voice strained. "Near the park, it's beautiful, like some sort of jellyfish, all iridescent and luminous." "Don't stare at it," I instructed, recalling Elia's frantic warnings. "Just see it out of the corner of your eye. Elia said not to directly observe them, that they can intrude on your perception, mess with your mind." I redoubled my efforts, knowing that it wouldn't be long before they made their way to this side of town. Still nothing from the Preston house, the family inside oblivious to the insidious threat that was inexorably approaching them. A wisp of motion drew my attention, a delicate tendril of light like a gossamer ribbon floating in the air. For a moment I thought it was just more of the wind-blown snow, but then I recognized it. The faint, shimmering outline of a bell-shaped body coalescing into visibility behind it. Contact, I said quietly into the calm. I see them. They're forming up near the old boat shed. Even as I spoke the words, I became acutely aware of the shimmering in the air around me. Graceful, delicate, almost transparent forms began to appear, drifting lazily on the currents of the wind. Their bodies glowed with a faint, inner luminescence, an ethereal beauty that seemed to defy logic, beautiful in a way that almost hurt to gaze upon them. I tore my eyes away from them, forcing myself to look back at the Preston house. They're headed towards the Preston house, I said, a surge of adrenaline pushing through me. I'm going to try to head them off. Watch yourself, Walter, came Leo's voice in my ear, urgent and tight. We're coming to support you. Marcus, Clara moved to Walter's position now. I took a deep breath, filled my lungs with freezing air, and stepped out from behind the dilapidated boat shed, lifting the UV flashlight towards the closest weaver. Hey! I yelled, my voice cracking slightly in the cold, but infused with all the desperate defiance I could muster. Keep away. The entities halted their drifting motion for a moment. Their iridescent forms shimmered, seeming to pulse with a faint curiosity. For a split second, I thought perhaps they might desist and drift away, back into whatever nebulous darkness from which they had emerged. Then as one, they surged forward, their delicate forms accelerating with an unnerving, silent speed with a flick of my thumb. The UV light blazed to life, casting its purplish glow into the mass of spectral forms. Instantly, the lunging entities recoiled, their incandescent shapes flickering and dimming wherever the beam passed over them, like smoke in a strong breeze. Emboldened, I took a step forward, sweeping the light from side to side. It's working, I shouted back to my friends, my voice ringing with a fragile victory. The UV light affects them, but there were so many of them, and they were all around me now, a silent, swirling tide of glowing, ethereal forms. I reached into my pocket and retrieved a handful of salt, offering a quick, desperate prayer as I threw it at the nearest group of figures. The results were immediate and startling. Where the granules of salt struck the glowing forms, they seemed to dissolve, fading away in wisps of light, evaporating harmlessly into the chill night. But for every one that faded away, it seemed like two more took its place, solidifying from the shimmering air. They were endless. I continued to retreat towards the Preston house, keeping myself between them and the ghostly figures, a desperate, solitary shield. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging them, as I alternated between blasting the specters with UV light and throwing handfuls of salt. Too many, guys, I said breathlessly into the comms, my voice strained with effort. I need some help now. Almost on cue, I heard the hurried footfalls of someone running through the snow, crunching loudly. Leo slid to a stop beside me, adding his UV illumination to mine, bathing the front of the Preston house in an eerie purple glow. Moments later, Clara and Marcus joined us as well, flanking us and spreading out, shaking salt in front of us liberally. Our formation stretched across the front of the house, forming a fragile wall of purplish light and shimmering salt. The swirling figures drifted before us, their graceful forms now subtly contorted in what I could only describe as anger, or perhaps a deep, frustrated yearning, a system disrupted. Hold the line, Leo called over the rising wind, his voice firm, a defiant anchor in the swirling chaos. We can't let them get past us. It was nearly midnight. We were a handful of teenagers fighting against incomprehensible odds, against the very fabric of our town's reality. I risked a glance back at the Preston house and saw that they still hadn't ventured outside to see what was happening, their shadows moving placidly behind the lit windows, utterly unaware. I set my jaw and turned back to the task at hand. My arm was growing tired from holding the UV light, but we had no choice. We had to succeed. We had to protect this family and find a way to end whatever madness had gripped Port Serenity all those years ago. The Ether Weavers were closing in on us, their glowing forms brightening, growing more intense, pulsating with a rhythmic thrum that resonated deep in my bones. From somewhere distant, from the very heart of the town, I thought I heard the muted, muffled cheers of the townsfolk, counting down the final seconds of the year. 10, 9, 8. I didn't need to hear any more to know that when the clock struck midnight, These entities, these guardians of the dream weave, would be at the height of their power. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen soon. 7, 6, 5. I looked at my friends, their faces pale but resolute in the pulsing UV light, and saw the same fear and determination in their eyes that I felt. Whatever was about to happen, we would face it together. 4, 3, 2. The creatures surged upon us in a silent, luminous tide. 1, and then it was midnight. The world erupted in light and motion as the ether weavers swarmed, translucent and luminescent. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird in a cage, and I clenched the UV flashlight tightly in my fist. "Now," I yelled, barely able to hear my own voice above the eerie quiet that seemed to follow the entities, a vacuum of sound where they moved. As one, the four of us leapt into action, flickering our UV beams across the advancing forms, which coiled with ghostly spasms wherever the light touched them. "Let them get close," Leo shouted, grimacing as he fanned his beam back and forth, holding the line. Clara and Marcus were beside us, throwing handfuls of salt with practiced precision. Wherever the grains touched the figures, their forms disintegrated, glowing particles evaporating harmlessly into the darkness, like dust motes in sunlight. I risked a quick look back at the Preston home and spotted them still sitting in front of the TV through the window, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away from them. "We've got to pull them away from the house," I shouted to my companions. "Fan out, draw them away." We were already moving, though, a desperate dance of retreat and counterattack, drawing the things with our lights and our shifting motion. I could almost taste their hunger, their alien want, in the freezing air around us. It wasn't malice I sensed, but a system trying to reassert its order. They weren't hunting, they were trying to integrate. More of the town's folk had emerged from their buildings, drawn by the strange light, the flickering chaos. They stood dumbfounded in the street, watching us with wide-eyed awe and terror, their stillness-induced peace shattered. "Marcus, there are people behind us. Get them back," I called. Marcus nodded, his face pale with shock but his eyes still determined. He stepped out of our line, moving a few paces closer to the approaching civilians and shouting at them, waving his arms frantically, urging them to turn around and go back the way they came, back to their blissful, dream-filled homes. The ether weavers drifted closer, ebbing and flowing like a tide, as individual forms seemed to merge with their neighbors before separating again, their luminescence growing in intensity. I tore my gaze away from them, recalling Elia's caution about their entrancing movements. "They're flanking around us," Clara shouted, her voice grunting with the effort. It was true. For all we were keeping them at bay, we were allowing them to flank us and surround the group. Already they had pushed us away from the Preston house and had cut us off from the interior of the town. "We've got to punch through them," Leo shouted, his light dimming ominously as the batteries began to fade. "If we can get to the lighthouse, we can use the main light to keep them away." It was the only plan we had, a desperate Hail Mary attempt. We began to move together, directing our ultraviolet beams and throwing salt to punch a fragile hole through the mass of creatures. I thought of the town of Port Serenity and wondered how many years this had been happening, how many people had met their end, not at the hands of malevolent monsters, but as gentle integrations into a collective dream. We made it to the lighthouse, our backs pressed against the cold, rough stone base as the entities floated around us, their glow intensifying, a swirling vortex of ethereal light. "The door," I said, my voice hoarse, fumbling with the rusty padlock. "It's still locked." Leo pushed me aside, his face grim. He dug a pair of heavy bolt cutters from his pack. "Out of the way," he grunted, straining with the effort of cutting the rusted metal hasp. With a sharp snap, it parted, and we stumbled inside, slamming the heavy wooden door behind us. I could see the light of the things outside leaking in through the various gaps and seams of the door and walls, a pulsating, alien glow. "All the way up," I said, taking the steps 2 at a time, my legs burning with the effort. "We've got to reach the lamp room." Up and up we went, our legs straining with the effort, the spiraling staircase a dizzying tunnel. I could almost feel the wordless pressure of those things pushing at the door far below, a collective, insistent will. But I knew it was only my imagination, the dream trying to reassert itself. At last, we reached the uppermost level and stepped out into the space that housed the enormous Fresnel lens, still in place, its intricate prisms designed to rotate about the central oil lamp, sending its beam far out to sea. Clara looked around frantically. "How do we light it?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Marcus shoved us aside and worked the old, rusted controls, his fingers flying over the dials and levers. "I've been studying this," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a minute." The pressure on the door beneath us was growing stronger. I could hear the wood straining, starting to splinter. "Marcus," I said calmly, trying to control my breathing. "We don't have a minute." At that moment, the great lamp lit with a stuttering hum, a blinding flash. The brightness of it, a raw, pure light, was far greater than the glow of our ultraviolet flashlights, casting its immense beam across the dark sky. I could see the instant effect it had upon the creatures outside. Their bodies disintegrated in the powerful, focused light, and the sound of their silent screams, a high-pitched, mental shriek of agony, filled the chill night air as they fled from its touch, dissolving into nothingness. The light swept across the town, a cleansing, brilliant arc. I saw incredulous townsfolk staring up at the lighthouse from where they had begun to exit their homes and places of hiding, their faces bleached of all color, their eyes wide with confusion, a dawning, terrible awareness. "It's working," said Clara breathlessly, the light from the rotation passing over her face, making her eyes gleam. But even as the beam made its first full circuit, I could see the things beginning to reform in the shadows. Coalescing from the shimmering air, their forms slowly reweaving themselves. They were smart and they were fast. "We need more," I shouted, the words tumbling out of me. "Just the light isn't enough. They'll adapt." Leo's eyes lit up with a wild, desperate thought. "The salt," he said. "The snow machines at the ski resort. If we can route them to the supply we brought back earlier, the granular salt, we can lay a continuous barrier over the area." "And what about the other things Elias mentioned?" Marcus concluded, pulling up a map on his phone, his fingers flying. "The sound frequencies, the psychological disruptors. We could broadcast them through the town's emergency broadcast system. It's insane, but it's the only thing we could come up with." Behind us, I could sense the entities recovering, growing stronger, preparing to renew their attack, their silent presence pressing against the lighthouse walls. And we moved forward then, with the next step of our hopeless plan to rescue Port Serenity. This is where the story truly begins. My name is Walter Mills, and I am dying. The doctors gave me 6 months tops, but before I go, there's a story I need to tell. A tale of secrets, madness, and the chilling truth hidden beneath the placid surface of Port Serenity. It all started not on New Year's Eve, but years before, on a crisp autumn morning in 1962. I was a young sailor, fresh-faced and eager, reporting for duty on the USS Eldridge. The air buzzed with excitement and tension as we prepared for a classified naval mission. None of us knew what lay ahead, but we could feel the weight of importance hanging over us. As we boarded the ship, I noticed a group of figures standing apart from the rest. They wore flowing robes of midnight blue and crimson masks that covered their entire faces, intricate and unsettling, like ancient, forgotten deities. Even from a distance, there was something unnerving about them. They moved with an eerie grace, almost gliding across the deck, their steps unnaturally silent. "Who are they?" I whispered to Ramirez, a grizzled veteran standing next to me, his thick mustache bristling. He shook his head, his eyes narrowed. "No idea, kid, but whatever's going on, it's big. Bigger than anything I've seen in my 20 years at sea." We watched, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach as the masked figures approached Captain Hollister. Even our stern, unfappable leader seemed on edge as he spoke with them in hushed, urgent tones. Their voices, when they spoke, were oddly melodious, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them, though I couldn't discern their words. After a brief, intense conversation, they disappeared below deck, followed closely by the captain, his shoulders hunched. His usual proud, bearing diminished hours passed before Captain Hollister emerged again, his face ashen, his uniform rumpled. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished, his eyes holding a haunted, distant look. He gathered us all on the main deck, his voice carrying over the constant, rhythmic churn of the ship's engines and the whisper of the waves against the hull. "Men," he began, his eyes scanning our faces, though his gaze seemed to look through us, at something far away, "we are about to embark on a mission of utmost importance and secrecy. I can't disclose the details, but know this, what we do here may change the course of history as we know it. The very fabric of reality could depend on our success." A murmur rippled through the crew, a nervous ripple of apprehension. I glanced at Briggs, a young sailor with a mop of unruly blonde hair, who was practically bouncing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The captain continued, his voice growing grave, a chilling solemnity settling over his words. "Due to the nature of this mission, we must take extreme precautions. Each of you will be issued a contingency pill, Keep it with you at all times, guard it with your life. The deck fell silent, the only sound the distant shriek of gulls. I felt my stomach lurch, a cold dread coiling in my gut. In the event of capture, Captain Hollister's voice resonated, or if the mission is compromised beyond salvage, you are to take the pill immediately. There will be no exceptions. No negotiation, this is an order. Myers, a burly sailor with tattoos covering his massive arms, let out a low whistle, a sound of grim resignation. Jesus Christ, he muttered, his usual bravado deflating. Contingency pill. That's just a fancy word for cyanide, ain't it? Captain Hollister's eyes narrowed, sweeping over the crew. This is not a request, gentlemen, it's an order. Understand? A chorus of reluctant "yes, sir" echoed across the deck, thin and strained. As we filed past to receive our pills, small, plain, white tablets, I noticed Yandel, a quiet, nervous man, trembling slightly. His eyes darted around, never settling on one spot for long, as if he expected something to materialize out of thin air back in our quarters. Theories flew wild, each one more outlandish than the last. Briggs, ever the joker, laughed it off, tossing his pill in the air and catching it with a practiced flick of his wrist. It's probably just sugar pills, he said with a grin, a forced lightness in his tone. Scare tactics to keep us in line. The old man just wants us to take it seriously. Be an idiot, Briggs, Ramirez growled, his voice low and serious. This is serious business. You saw the captain's face, and those strange ones. This ain't no game. I sat on my bunk, turning the small, innocuous-looking pill over in my hand. What had we gotten ourselves into? The masked figures, the chilling secrecy, the mandatory suicide clause, it all felt like something out of a fevered dream, a nightmarish tale come to life. As night fell and we set sail into the vast, inky blackness of the Pacific, leaving the familiar lights of the shore far behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into something far beyond our understanding. The gentle rocking of the ship, usually so calming, did little to soothe my frayed nerves. As I lay awake in the narrow confines of my bunk, listening to the creaks and groans of the ship, I wondered what horrors awaited us in the depths of the ocean, or perhaps in the depths of ourselves. The sun had barely risen, a faint blush on the eastern horizon, when a commotion erupted on the deck. A shout, then another, quickly turning into a chorus of alarmed whispers. I rushed out of my bunk, heart pounding, to find a crowd gathered around a fallen figure near the main mast. As I pushed my way through the hushed throng, my stomach dropped. It was Briggs, lying motionless on the cold metal floor of the deck, his boyish face now twisted in a grimace. The mop of unruly hair I'd grown accustomed to seeing bounce around the ship now lay flat against his forehead, damp with sweat. His hand was clenched tightly at his side, and I could see the remnants of the small white pill, now fragmented and dissolved between his fingers. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, choked with a sudden, horrifying realization. Ramirez stood nearby, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. He shook his head, his thick mustache twitching with grim regret. "He took the pill," he said, his voice hollow. "The damn fool, thought it was a joke, a scare tactic, he called it. Didn't believe it was real." I stared at Briggs' lifeless body, the vibrant spark of his youth extinguished. A cold dread seeped into my bones, replacing the fear with a chilling certainty. "Clear the way," the captain's voice boomed across the deck, cutting through the hushed whispers like a whip. He strode towards us, his weathered face set in a grim expression, eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. "What is the meaning of this, sir?" Myers growled, stepping forward, his massive frame radiating controlled anger. "We need to turn back, this ain't right. Briggs is dead. This is a damn suicide mission." The captain's piercing gaze locked onto Myers, cold and unyielding. "We will do no such thing, sailor. Our mission continues as planned, no exceptions. No turning back." A ripple of disbelief, of raw, desperate anger, ran through the crew. Yandel, standing at the edge of the group, his face pale, began to shake visibly, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "But sir," he stammered, his voice a frantic squeak, "Briggs is dead. We can't just—" "Enough." The captain's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and final. "This is precisely why you were given those pills. The mission is paramount. We press on." I felt a chill, colder than the morning air, run down my spine as the captain continued, his voice lowering to a dangerous timbre, a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the deck. "As of this moment, all communications are cut off. No messages in or out. Is that clear?" A chorus of reluctant "yes, sir," echoed across the deck, devoid of conviction. As the captain turned to leave, his back ramrod straight, he paused. "Get that body below deck," he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We'll give him a proper burial at sea when time allows." I watched, numb and disbelieving, as Myers and Ramirez, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and sorrow, lifted Briggs' body. The rest of the crew dispersed slowly, muttering among themselves, their steps heavy with a newfound dread. I approached Yandel, who was still trembling, his face ghostly white. "You okay, Yandel?" I asked, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. He flinched at my touch, as if burned. "This isn't right," he whispered, his eyes darting around nervously, unable to meet my gaze. "What are we really doing out here, Walter? What is this mission?" I had no answer for him. As we made our way back to our stations, the image of Briggs' lifeless body, his boyish face twisted in that final grimace, seared itself into my mind. The weight of the cyanide pill in my pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, a constant, chilling reminder of the captain's cold, resolved throughout the day. Tension hung over the ship like a thick, suffocating fog. The usual banter and camaraderie among the crew were replaced by hushed whispers, furtive glances, and a pervasive, insidious suspicion. Even the endless expanse of the Pacific, usually a comforting, endless blue, seemed more ominous now, its deep waters hiding untold secrets beneath its shimmering surface. As I manned my post, my gaze sweeping the horizon, I caught glimpses of the secret ones moving about the ship, their silent presence a chilling constant. Their crimson masks gleamed dully in the sunlight, and their midnight blue robes seemed to flutter even when there was no breeze, as if stirred by an invisible current. They spoke to no one, their movements precise and purposeful, their very existence a living enigma, a constant reminder of the profound mystery surrounding our mission. At one point, I saw Myers, unable to contain his simmering rage, confront one of them near the stern. His muscular frame towering over the robed figure, fists clenched at his sides, his face a mask of furious desperation. "What the hell are you people?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the deck, raw and trembling with suppressed anger. "What do you want from us? What did you do to Briggs?" The secret one merely tilted their head, their crimson mask revealing nothing, no hint of expression or understanding. After a moment of tense, agonizing silence, they simply glided away, their movements unnervingly fluid, leaving Myers fuming, his hands shaking with impotent rage. As night fell, or what we assumed was night given the sun's unchanging position, I found myself on watch with Ramirez. We stood in silence for a long while, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, a hypnotic, unsettling rhythm in the vast silence of the ocean. Finally, Ramirez spoke, his voice low, rough like sandpaper. "I've been at sea for 20 years, Walter," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon, though there was nothing but endless ocean to see. "Never seen anything like this. Never felt anything like this." I nodded, unsure of what to say, what comfort I could offer when I felt the same gnawing dread. "Whatever's going on," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's big. Bigger than us, bigger than Briggs, bigger than anything I can fathom." He turned to me then, his weathered face grave in the pale, eerie moonlight that seemed to emanate not from the sky, but from the very water itself. "Keep your wits about you, kid. I've got a feeling things are going to get a lot worse before they get better, and I don't think there's anything out here that can save us." 3 days after Briggs' death, I woke to an unsettling stillness. The usual hum of the ship's engines, the rhythmic groan of the hull, the distant clatter of pots in the galley, all seemed muffled, swallowed by an oppressive silence, as if we were suspended in a void, disconnected from the very world. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness, but it was impenetrable, absolute. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet as I fumbled for the light switch. It clicked, but nothing happened. I tried another and another. No light. I stumbled out of my bunk, hands outstretched, feeling my way to the door. The corridor outside was equally dark, filled with confused voices and the sound of people bumping into walls. "Anyone got a light?" Someone called out, their voice edged with panic. A match flared to life, illuminating Ramirez's weathered face in the flickering glow. His eyes were wide, reflecting the tiny flame. In the brief, dancing light, I saw the confusion and fear etched on the faces of my fellow crew members, ghostly visages in the sudden, transient illumination. "What's going on?" Yandel's voice quavered from somewhere in the darkness, choked with barely suppressed terror. "Power outage, maybe," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. This darkness felt different, unnatural. It wasn't an absence of light. It was an active presence of blackness, dense and consuming, We made our way, a stumbling, anxious procession, to the upper deck, hoping for some answers, for a glimpse of the familiar sky. As we emerged into the open air, a collective gasp rippled through the group. The sky above us was a blank canvas of pure, unfathomable black. No stars, no moon, just an endless void, a terrifying, velvet emptiness that stretched from horizon to horizon, swallowing every shred of light. "This ain't right," Myers growled, his burly frame tense, his voice a guttural whisper of disbelief. "Where's the damn moon? Where are the stars?" We stood there, a group of grown men, hardened sailors, reduced to wide-eyed children in the face of this inexplicable phenomenon. The darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides, a palpable weight, swallowing the beam of the few flashlights we'd managed to find, their feeble rays swallowed by the void. As dawn approached, we waited with bated breath for the first rays of sunlight to break through the endless night. But they never came. The sun, like the moon and stars, had vanished. All hands on deck. The captain's voice cut through the darkness, somehow even more commanding, more resonant in the absence of light. We gathered around him, our faces ghoulish in the glow of his single lantern, its light barely piercing the oppressive gloom. "I know you're all concerned," he began, his eyes sweeping over us, though they seemed to hold no light, only weary resignation. "But we must maintain order and continue our mission." "Mission?" Myers spat, his voice thick with contempt. "What mission? We're sailing in the dark to God knows where. We're blind." The captain's gaze hardened, a flicker of his old authority returning. "That's enough, sailor. Return to your post and await further instructions." As we dispersed, a sense of dread settling over us like a shroud, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The secret ones had emerged from below deck, their crimson masks gleaming dully in the lantern light, their midnight blue robes seeming to absorb the little illumination that existed. They moved with purpose, an unnerving, silent efficiency, carrying strange, intricate equipment I'd never seen before. Gleaming metallic rods, glowing orbs, pulsating crystals. Over the next few hours, I watched as they set up what looked like complex, alien communication arrays on the upper decks, their hushed voices carrying on the still air, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, a series of clicks, hisses, and resonant hums that felt more like vibrations in my skull than actual words. "What do you think they're doing?" I asked Ramirez as we watched from our post, peering through the gloom. He shook his head, his mustache twitching with unease. "Nothing good, I'd wager. Nothing good at all." As the day wore on, or what we assumed was day given the unchanging blackness, theories began to circulate among the crew, each one more outlandish than the last, fueled by fear and sleep deprivation. "It's got to be aliens," Yandel whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "They've blocked out the sun somehow. They're coming for us." "Don't be ridiculous, Yandel," Ramirez scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's more likely we've sailed into some kind of government experiment. Maybe a new weapon that can control the weather, or a secret project that went wrong." Myers, who had been pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his frustration a palpable aura around him, suddenly stopped. His eyes, though barely visible in the gloom, seemed distant, haunted. What if there's been a nuclear war?" he said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, raw with a terrifying realization. "Maybe this is what the end of the world looks like, just nothing." The thought sent a chill down my spine, a cold, creeping certainty. I tried to push it away, to cling to some semblance of hope, but in the oppressive darkness, it was hard to keep the fear at bay. As night fell, or what we perpetually assumed was night given the unending blackness, the atmosphere on the ship grew even more tense, more suffocating. The air itself seemed to crackle with unspoken dread. The secret ones continued their mysterious activities, their movements becoming more frantic, more urgent as time passed. Their clicking and humming grew louder, more insistent. I found myself standing at the railing, staring out into the inky void that had swallowed the ocean, trying to find some anchor in the endless emptiness. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull was the only reminder that we were still at sea, and not floating in some nightmarish abyss, a forgotten ship adrift in the cosmic nothing. A hand on my shoulder made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Yandel, his face pale, almost translucent, in the dim, flickering light of a nearby lantern. "Do you think we'll ever see the sun again, Walter?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a fragile hope I couldn't share. I wanted to reassure him, to say that of course we would, that this was just some strange but temporary phenomenon, a cosmic blip. But the words stuck in my throat, dry and heavy. In that moment, surrounded by endless darkness and mounting dread, With the unsettling hum of the Secret One's alien instruments filling the air, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. "I don't know, Yandel," I finally admitted, my voice as hollow as my own growing hope. "I just don't know." A week had passed since the darkness had enveloped us, a week lost to an endless, lightless night. The atmosphere on the ship had grown thick with tension and despair, a suffocating shroud that clung to every man. The constant blackness weighed on our minds, fraying nerves and pushing tempers to the breaking point. I'd taken to pacing the corridors during what I assumed were night hours, unable to sleep in the oppressive gloom, haunted by the unsettling silence and the distant, alien hum of the Secret One's instruments. As I rounded a corner near the ship's gym, a commotion erupted ahead, raised voices, sharp, angry shouts, and the unmistakable sound of scuffling feet echoing off the metal walls. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum against bone. I quickened my pace, dread coiling in my gut. The scene that greeted me as I entered the gym was one of chaos. Myers, his massive frame silhouetted in the dim, flickering emergency lighting, had Yandel pinned against a wall, his arm pressed against the smaller man's throat. Yandel's feet dangled inches off the ground, his face contorted in pain and terror, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. "You've been talking to them, haven't you?" Myers growled, his face inches from Yandel's, his eyes blazing with a manic, paranoid intensity I'd never seen before. "Tell me what they're planning. What did they tell you?" Yandel's eyes darted wildly, pleading. "I don't know what you're talking about," he wheezed, his voice choked. "Please, let me go." I stepped forward, my hands raised in a placating gesture. "Myers, come on, put him down. This isn't helping anyone." "He doesn't know anything." Myers' head snapped towards me, his eyes blazing with that same manic intensity, a horrifying, almost feral light. "Stay out of this, Mills," he snarled, his voice raw. "This little rat's been sneaking around, whispering with those masked freaks. He knows something. He's with them." Before I could respond, before I could reason with the desperate, paranoid rage consuming Myers, Yandel's knee shot up, catching Myers in the groin. The larger man howled in pain, a guttural roar, releasing his grip. Yandel dropped to the floor, scrambling away, his breath coming in ragged, desperate sobs. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, a nightmarish tableau illuminated by the unreliable, flickering emergency lights. Myers, recovering from the blow, lunged at Yandel with a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, his face a mask of primal fury. Yandel, eyes wide with terror, grabbed a nearby dumbbell, its cold metal gleaming dully in the dim light, and swung it in a wild, desperate arc. The sickening crunch of metal meeting flesh filled the air, a wet, sickening sound that resonated deep in my bones. Myers staggered back, a choked gasp escaping his lips, blood pouring in a dark, viscous stream from a deep gash above his eye. He touched the wound, staring at his crimson-stained fingers in disbelief, his eyes unfocused. You little," he mumbled, his words slurring, losing coherence. Then, without warning, he charged again, a blind, unthinking force. Yandel, still clutching the dumbbell, tried to dodge, but Myers' sheer bulk and momentum were too much. They crashed into a rack of weights, sending barbells clattering to the floor with a deafening clang that echoed through the confined space. In the ensuing struggle, Myers' hand, massive and calloused, closed around Yandel's throat, squeezing with brutal force. I rushed forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins, trying to pry them apart, but it was like trying to separate two magnets, locked in an unbreakable, deadly embrace. As I grappled with Myers' arm, trying to force his grip open, I saw Yandel's hand, trembling and desperate, disappear into his pocket. "No," I shouted, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. No, I knew what he was about to do, but it was too late. Yandel's jaw clenched, a grim, final resolve settling over his face, and his body went rigid. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth as the cyanide pill took effect, its deadly work swift and brutal. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and grim determination, locked onto mine for a brief, horrifying moment, a silent plea, a final farewell before the light in them faded, extinguished like a candle in a gale. Myers, still grappling, his eyes wide, released his grip, stumbling backward, his face a mask of confusion. What just happened?" he mumbled, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had come, replaced by a dawning horror. I knelt beside Yandel's lifeless body, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The dumbbell he'd used to defend himself lying nearby, now streaked with Myers' blood. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Myers' labored, ragged breathing and the distant, unsettling hum of the ship's engines. a constant, omnipresent reminder of our inescapable plight. As I looked up at Myers, I saw the dawning horror on his face, the slow, agonizing realization of what he'd done. The gash above his eye continued to bleed, the crimson stream a stark contrast to his rapidly paling skin. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with genuine shock and remorse. "He was talking to them, he was with them. I just wanted answers, I swear." I stood slowly, my mind reeling, the horrors compounding, blurring the lines of sanity. "We need to report this," I said, though the words felt hollow, utterly meaningless in the face of what had transpired. Myers nodded numbly, his eyes never leaving Yandel's body, his gaze fixed on the grim, unmoving figure. As we made our way to find the captain, the weight of what had transpired settled over us like a shroud, thick and suffocating. The darkness that had consumed our world outside now seemed to have found its way into our hearts, leaching out all hope, all reason. The lines between right and wrong, sanity and madness, were blurring with each passing day. And as I glanced at Myers' haunted, shattered expression, I couldn't help but wonder how long before the rest of us succumbed to this creeping despair, this insidious unraveling of the mind. I crept through the darkened corridors of the ship, my nerves on edge, stretched taut like violin strings ready to snap. Sleep had eluded me for days now, the constant, oppressive darkness and mounting tension wearing away at my sanity, blurring the edges of what was real. Every creak of the ship, every whisper of the wind, sounded like a monstrous presence. As I rounded a corner near the officers' mess, a faint glow caught my eye, a sliver of otherworldly light spilling from beneath a cabin door. My heart raced, a frantic drum in my chest, as I approached. This was one of the cabins assigned to the secret ones, the robed figures whose chilling silence and inscrutable masks had become a constant, terrifying backdrop to our descent into madness. I'd never seen inside their quarters before. Curiosity, a desperate, morbid need to understand, warred with an overwhelming, primal fear. I hesitated outside, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the door. The sensible part of me screamed to turn back, to retreat to the dubious safety of my bunk, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But some deeper instinct, a fatalistic compulsion, propelled me forward. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear any sound from within. Nothing. Only the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the ship, a sound I now associated with their presence. Slowly, carefully, I turned the handle and eased the door open a crack, just enough to peer inside. The sight that greeted me sent ice through my veins, freezing my blood in its tracks. One of the secret ones stood in the center of the small, cramped room, its back to me, but this was no human form, not truly. Beneath those flowing robes of midnight blue, the creature's body seemed to shift and undulate, as if made of living clay or perhaps liquid shadow. It wasn't a solid, stable form. It flowed and pulsed, a dark, shifting mass. As I watched in horror, it raised spindly, impossibly long arms, ending not in fingers, but in two long, glistening claws like obsidian blades. With sickening precision, it began to slice into its own flesh, peeling back layers of what appeared to be skin to reveal pulsing, luminescent organs beneath. There was no blood, only a viscous, oily substance that oozed from the wounds, shimmering with an inner, unearthly light. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me, as the thing manipulated its own innards, rearranging them like puzzle pieces, or perhaps tuning some internal mechanism. All the while, it emitted a low, continuous keening sound, a sound that wasn't a vocalization, but a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, setting my teeth on edge. It was a sound of immense, terrible concentration, or perhaps pain. I must have made some small noise of disgust, a choked gasp, for suddenly, with an impossible speed that defied anatomy, the creature's head swiveled 180 degrees to face me. Where a face should have been was only a writhing mass of short, stubby tentacles, like thick worms, surrounding a single, enormous, unblinking eye. It was an eye unlike anything I had ever seen, deep and ancient, a swirling vortex of green and purple light terror, cold and absolute, gripped me. I stumbled backward, my heart thundering in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs, as I scrambled to close the door and fled down the corridor, the unnatural eye seared into my mind, its alien gaze burning a hole in my sanity. When I finally stopped running, gasping for breath, I found myself in a deserted part of the ship, leaning against a cold metal wall, trying to process what I'd seen. It defied all logic, all understanding of biology, all sanity. What were these things we'd brought on board? What had the captain unleashed upon us? And what did they mean to do with our ship, with us in this endless, terrifying darkness? I stood on the bridge, my eyes straining against the oppressive, absolute darkness that had become our constant companion for what felt like an eternity. The air felt thick, heavy, with an unnatural stillness that set my nerves on edge, making my skin crawl. The only sound was the low, ceaseless hum of the ship's engines, a monotonous drone that was slowly driving us all mad. Suddenly, the door creaked open behind me, and I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. The captain stumbled in, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, my breath caught in my chest. The man before me was a far cry from the stern, authoritative figure I'd known. His uniform hung loosely on his gaunt frame, his shoulders stooped, and his face was a mask of exhaustion and despair. Deep, bruised shadows carved hollows beneath his bloodshot eyes, and his skin had taken on an unhealthy, waxy pallor, almost translucent in the dim emergency light. He looked like a ghost. "Captain," I ventured, taking a hesitant step towards him, my voice a tentative whisper. He didn't seem to register my presence. Instead, he shuffled to the center of the bridge, his movements stiff, as if his limbs no longer obeyed him fully. When he spoke, his voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the low hum of the ship's engines. "Goodbye," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the endless blackness beyond the shattered viewport. "Goodbye, goodbye." A chill ran down my spine as he continued to repeat the word, his voice growing more frantic, more desperate with each iteration. It was a chilling farewell to a world we had lost, and perhaps to his own sanity. I reached out to touch his arm, hoping to snap him out of whatever trance had gripped him, to bring him back to us. But he flinched away from my touch as if burned, recoiling with a shudder. Before I could make another attempt, before I could try to reach him again, the door burst open. Myers barreled in, his face flushed and his eyes wild, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "The gun deck," he panted, gesturing frantically behind him, his voice laced with a fresh, raw horror. "You've got to see this, Walter." Casting one last worried glance at the captain, who continued his eerie, detached mantra of goodbye, I followed Myers out of the bridge and down to the gun deck, dread coiling in my gut. The sight that greeted us there turned my blood to ice. The secret ones, their crimson masks gleaming dully in the flickering, orange light of a makeshift pyre, stood in a silent, perfect circle. At the center of their ring, bodies burned. The stench of charred flesh filled the air, thick and sickening, making my stomach heave, bile rising in my throat. What the hell? I gasped, struggling to comprehend the horrific scene before me. My mind refusing to accept what my eyes saw. Myers grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. His own breath hitched. "Those are our crew, Walter," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of raging fury and primal fear. "Our men, they're burning them." I recognized Briggs' watch, the one his ma gave him, and Corporal Hayes' dog tags. The full, agonizing horror of his words sank in, chilling me to the core. This wasn't some unknown enemy. This was an insidious, internal betrayal. A deafening crack split the air above us. The ship lurched violently, sending us stumbling, throwing us off balance. Water sprayed over the deck, cold and biting, as massive, impossible waves, born of the unnatural darkness, began to pummel the ship from all sides. "All hands on deck," Ramirez's voice boomed from somewhere above us, frantic and desperate. "We're taking on water. The hull is breached." Chaos erupted as crew members scrambled to respond to the sudden, overwhelming onslaught. I struggled to keep my footing as the ship pitched and rolled beneath us, tossed like a toy in a monstrous bathtub. Through the deafening din of alarms, rushing water, and splintering metal, I could hear screams of pain as people were thrown against walls or struck by loose equipment, their cries swallowed by the tempest. The secret ones, however, remained unnaturally still amidst the pandemonium, their masks turned towards the raging, impossible sea, as another monstrous wave crashed over the deck. As the water swept over me, I caught a glimpse of something vast and terrible in the churning depths below, just beneath the surface, a vast, writhing shape, impossibly large, like a mountain made of living shadow. The storm intensified, its fury unleashed upon our battered ship with relentless, unimaginable force. I clung to a railing, my knuckles white with effort, the metal biting into my skin as the vessel pitched and rolled beneath my feet, groaning like a dying beast. The sky above, once an impenetrable void, now blazed with an otherworldly light, flashes of sickly green and pulsing purple tearing through the endless darkness, illuminating the churning, monstrous sea in a grotesque, horrific tableau. With each burst of unnatural radiance, I glimpsed things that defied comprehension, things that made my mind reel. Vast, writhing shapes, forms that twisted and undulated just beneath the waves, their scale unimaginable, their outlines blurred by the abyssal gloom. They were like mountains or continents of living, alien flesh. "Dear God," I whispered, my voice lost in the howling wind, choked with terror. A nearby cry snapped me from my horrified trance. Ramirez stood at the ship's edge, his eyes wide, wild and unfocused, his face a mask of terror and a strange, desperate peace. Before I could react, before I could even process what he was doing, he climbed onto the railing, his body silhouetted against the bizarre, pulsating sky. "Ramirez, no." I screamed, my voice ripped away by the wind as I lunged towards him, my hand outstretched. But I was too late. With a haunting, guttural laugh that echoed across the deck, a sound of utter despair and release, Ramirez spread his arms wide and leapt into the roiling, phosphorescent waters below. The sea, that unimaginable maw, swallowed him in an instant, leaving no trace of the man I'd known, only a ripple in the glowing, turbulent surface. I staggered back, my mind reeling from the successive losses, the relentless assault on my sanity. Another blinding flash of sickly green light lit up the sky, and I looked up instinctively. What I saw froze the blood in my veins, solidified it into icy dread. Vast, tentacled monstrosities, like living storm clouds, writhed across the heavens, their impossible forms twisting in ways that hurt to look at, defying all geometry, all sanity. Eyes larger than moons blinked lazily, focusing on our tiny, doomed vessel with a malevolent, ancient interest. I felt my sanity fraying at the edges, unraveling thread by thread, as I tried to comprehend the cosmic horror unfolding before me, a nightmare made flesh. A reality turned inside out. A deafening crack split the air, followed by the screech of tearing metal, a sound that grated on my very soul. I whirled around to see a massive wave, easily 100 feet high, a towering wall of impossible water, bearing down on us, its crest glowing with the same unholy light as the things in the sky. There was no time to brace for impact, no time to even scream. The wall of water slammed into the ship with devastating, bone-shattering force. I was thrown off my feet, tumbling across the deck like a rag doll, as frigid, luminous seawater engulfed me. For terrifying moments I was submerged, tossed and spun, unable to tell up from down in the swirling chaos, my lungs burning. When I finally broke the surface, gasping for air, choking on the salty, glowing water, I found myself in the flooded bridge, now a wreckage of twisted metal and shattered glass. Bodies floated around me, dismembered fragments of what were once my crew members, men who hadn't been able to escape the deluge. Their lifeless eyes stared accusingly, fixed on the impossible alien sky, as I treaded water, trying desperately to make sense of our new reality through the shattered windows of the bridge. I saw the captain. He stood rigidly at attention, water lapping at his chest, completely submerged below his shoulders, his gaze fixed on something outside, something beyond my sight. He was utterly still, an unmoving statue in the swirling chaos. Then, through a newly formed fissure in the hull, a colossal eye, easily the size of our entire ship, peered in at us, its pupil a swirling vortex of unimaginable depth. Tendrils thick as redwood trees snaked around the bridge, their suckers latching onto the metal with sickening pops and tearing sounds. The creature, if such a mundane word could even apply to this cosmic horror, seemed to radiate an ancient, alien malevolence, an intelligence that dwarfed all human comprehension. The captain turned to me then, his face a mask of grim resignation, a quiet understanding in his haunted eyes. Without a word, he drew his service pistol from its holster, the dull gleam of the metal a stark contrast to the luminous eye outside. "Captain, don't!" I started to scream, to plead, but my words were drowned out by the thunderous report of the gun, echoing in the confined space. The captain's body slumped into the water, carried away by the surging currents, leaving me alone, treading water in the ruins of our bridge, face to face with an entity beyond human comprehension, an entity that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. The creature's presence filled the flooded bridge, an oppressive, suffocating weight bearing down on my mind, crushing my thoughts. Its massive eye, a swirling vortex of impossible colors, focused entirely on me, and I felt an alien consciousness, vast and cold, probing at the edges of my thoughts. Pain, sharp and excruciating, lanced through my skull as it burrowed deeper, a mental intrusion that made my very being recoil. It was sifting through my memories and experiences with a cold, clinical precision, like a librarian sorting through dusty books. Images flashed before my eyes, not just my own memories, but others. My childhood home, bathed in a sunlight I hadn't seen in days, my first day on the ship, the innocent eagerness. The horrific moment of discovering the true nature of our mission, the cyanide pills. Each memory was tinged with an otherworldly, shifting filter, as if viewed through a fractured, alien lens. I gritted my teeth, fighting against the intrusion, against the violation of my innermost self. "Get out of my head," I screamed, my voice hoarse and raw, a desperate, futile cry against the mental assault. The creature's eye pulsed with an eerie internal light, and I felt its attention sharpen, its focus narrowing entirely on me. The pain intensified, threatening to split my skull, to tear my mind apart. I thrashed in the water, desperate to escape, to find some reprieve, but there was nowhere to go. There was no escape within the confines of the shattered bridge, or perhaps within the confines of my own mind. As the alien presence delved deeper, plunging into the very core of my consciousness, I caught terrifying glimpses of its own alien thoughts, its own unimaginable experiences. Vast, incomprehensible vistas of time and space that threatened to shatter my sanity. I saw civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye, entire galaxies swallowed by hungry, cosmic voids, stars extinguished like candles. My mind reeled, teetering on the brink of absolute madness, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of its existence. In a desperate, primal act of defiance, I latched onto the one thing that had always anchored me, the one unwavering truth in my life. My family. I focused on the memory of my wife's smile, the gentle curve of her lips, the pure, unadulterated sound of my daughter's laughter, a bell-like chime. Their faces bloomed in my mind, vivid and luminous, a bulwark against the cosmic horror trying to consume me, a shield against the alien onslaught. "I love you," I whispered, clinging to the image of my family, pouring every ounce of love and warmth and humanity I possessed into that single thought. "I love you both so much." The creature's probing faltered, as if encountering something it couldn't understand, something entirely alien to its cold, vast consciousness. I pressed my advantage, flooding my mind with every cherished memory I had of my loved ones. Our wedding day, bathed in sunlight and laughter. My daughter's first wobbly steps, her tiny hand gripping mine. Quiet evenings spent together, the simple, profound peace of their presence. I poured all the love and warmth I could muster into these recollections. A desperate torrent of humanity. The pain in my head began to recede, a slow, agonizing withdrawal, and I felt the alien presence retreating, its vast consciousness pulling back from the confines of my mind. The massive eye blinked, a slow, deliberate movement, and for a moment I sensed something almost like confusion emanating from the creature, a flicker of uncertainty. Slowly, painfully, the colossal tendrils wrapped around the bridge began to loosen, their grip dissolving. Water rushed in through the gaps, a torrent of freezing liquid, and I struggled to keep my head above the rising tide, my body aching, shivering uncontrollably. The eye's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, a final, unblinking assessment. Then it began to retreat, pulling its unimaginable bulk into the depths, vanishing into the inky blackness from which it had emerged. As the creature disappeared beneath the waves, its immense form receding into the abyss, I felt my consciousness slipping away, the exhaustion finally claiming me. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the image of my wife and daughter, their faces etched with worry and love, a final, precious memory clinging to the edges of my fading mind. I opened my eyes to a blinding sun, a searing, brilliant orb I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity, and the gentle lapping of waves against something solid beneath me. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as I tried to move, a profound exhaustion weighing down my limbs. I was lying on my back, floating on what felt like a piece of debris, a broken fragment of wood, in the vast expanse of the ocean. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark, almost painful contrast to the cosmic horrors and unending darkness I'd witnessed. How long had I been unconscious? Hours, days, weeks? I turned my head slowly, wincing at the searing pain in my neck. In every direction, there was nothing but endless ocean, a vast, shimmering expanse of blue that stretched to the horizon. My throat was parched, lips cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration, my tongue swollen and dry. I closed my eyes again, trying to piece together what had happened. The ship, the storm, the monstrous eye staring into my very soul. A shudder ran through me at the memory. Had it all been real, or some fever dream brought on by prolonged exposure to the darkness, by the madness of the confinement? A distant sound caught my attention, a low, rhythmic thrumming of an engine. I forced my eyes open, squinting against the glare of the sun on the water. On the horizon, a faint smudge at first, I could just make out the silhouette of a boat, growing slowly larger. "Hey," I tried to shout, but my voice came out as a hoarse, painful whisper, barely audible even to myself. I waved my arm weakly, a desperate, almost futile gesture, praying they would spot me. The boat grew larger as it approached. It was a fishing vessel, weather-beaten but sturdy, its hull scarred by countless voyages. I could see figures moving on the deck, pointing in my direction. Relief, a profound, overwhelming wave of it, washed over me as I realized they had seen me. As they drew alongside, a coiled rope was thrown, splashing lightly in the water near me. I grabbed it with trembling, clumsy hands, my fingers raw and stiff, allowing myself to be pulled towards the boat. Strong, calloused arms reached down, hauling me aboard. I collapsed onto the deck, gasping and shaking, my body utterly spent. "Easy there, friend," a gruff voice said in heavily accented English. "You're safe now. Just breathe." I looked up at my rescuers, a group of weathered fishermen, their faces etched with concern and curiosity, their eyes kind. One of them, an older man with deep lines around his eyes and a grizzled beard, knelt beside me, offering a canteen of water. Where am I?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a rasp. "About 50 miles off the coast of Guam," he replied, his voice calm. "You're lucky we found you. What happened to your ship, son?" Guam. We had been nowhere near Guam when whatever it was had happened. How had I drifted so far? How long had I been out there? My mind reeled. I shook my head, unable to form a coherent answer, the memories a jumbled, terrifying mess. The fisherman patted my shoulder gently. "Rest now. We'll get you to shore and sort things out there. You're lucky to be alive." As they bustled around me, providing water and a rough blanket, my hand brushed against something in my pocket. With a jolt, a sudden, electric shock of memory, I remembered the documents. The stolen documents from the secret ones. Somehow, miraculously, they were still there, protected by a waterproof pouch, intact. I closed my eyes, exhaustion overtaking me, pulling me into a deep, dreamless void. But even as I drifted off, my mind raced. What secret did those papers hold? What was the true nature of our mission, and of the horrors we'd encountered? And why, after all that, was I the only one left, as the fishing boat docked in Guam, a bustling port city vibrant with life and noise? I stumbled onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. My legs were wobbly, unused to the stillness of land after so long at sea, my body protesting every movement. The fishermen who had rescued me spoke in hushed, urgent tones to local authorities, gesturing in my direction, their faces grave. I clutched the waterproof pouch containing the stolen documents close to my chest, acutely aware of their weight and the unimaginable secrets they held. The next few days passed in a blur of medical examinations, debriefings by stern-faced naval officers who seemed to know more than they let on, and fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep, plagued by visions of writhing tentacles and impossibly large, ancient eyes. When I was finally left alone in a small, impersonal hotel room, the silence was deafening. I spread the damp, crinkled pages across the bed, my hands trembling with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The documents were a bewildering mix. Ancient-looking parchments, brittle and smelling of forgotten things, covered in swirling, unintelligible scripts, interspersed with more modern, typewritten reports, stark and clinical. Many were in languages I didn't recognize, flowing scripts that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, hinting at a reality far older and stranger than I could comprehend. But there were enough in English, enough decipherable diagrams and translated passages, for me to begin piecing together the horrifying truth, a truth so profound it threatened to shatter the fragile remnants of my sanity. I worked tirelessly, barely sleeping or eating, the passage of time marked only by the rise and set of the sun outside my window. I delved deeper into the cosmic secrets laid out before me, my mind racing, desperate for understanding. Slowly, painstakingly, the truth about Eden began to take shape. Eden, I learned, was not a place, not the biblical garden, but an entity. An ancient, cosmic being of unimaginable power, responsible for seeding life throughout the universe. Earth was just one of countless worlds touched by Eden's influence, one of its experiments. The entity had arrived on our planet billions of years ago, a primordial cosmic gardener, nurturing the primordial soup that would eventually give rise to all life as we know it, shaping evolution itself. But humanity's evolution, I discovered with a chilling dread, had taken an unexpected, unforeseen turn. As our species grew in intelligence and complexity, as our consciousness expanded, we began to have an effect on Eden itself. Our thoughts, our emotions, our very essence, our collective consciousness. It was somehow feeding back into the cosmic entity that had created us, altering it, influencing it at first. This symbiosis had been beneficial. Eden, the documents explained, grew stronger, more vibrant, its universal purpose amplified by the burgeoning life it had fostered. But as human civilization advanced, as our population exploded and our collective consciousness became more complex, more turbulent, something began to change. Our darker impulses, greed, hatred, selfishness, violence, fear, began to corrupt Eden. The entity that had once been a source of pure creation, of life-giving cosmic energy, was now tainted by humanity's worst traits, becoming twisted, diseased. The secret ones, I discovered, were not alien invaders, but an ancient order, a secret society of humans dedicated to protecting Eden, to preserving its purity. They had watched over millennia as humanity's influence grew more toxic, as our collective subconscious polluted the very wellspring of life. Now, they believed, the only way to save Eden, and by extension all life in the universe that Eden had spawned, was to destroy the source of the corruption. Humanity itself. They were not monsters, they were desperate surgeons, attempting a horrific but necessary amputation. My hands shook uncontrollably as I read the final pages, the words blurring, the implications of my discovery shattering what was left of my composure. The mission I had been part of, the ship I had served on, the Eldridge, was just one small, terrifying piece of a much larger, global plan. The secret ones were working to awaken Eden fully, to bring the cosmic entity into our world in its entirety, to unleash its power. They believed that only by confronting humanity directly, by purging its cancerous influence, could Eden cleanse itself, purge itself of our corrupting touch. As I stared at the last document, my mind reeling, a terrible thought struck me. The storm we had encountered, the monstrous forms we had glimpsed in the sky and beneath the waves, the impossible eye that had peered into my soul, had that been Eden, partially awakened? And if so, what would a fully conscious, fully unleashed Eden do to our world? To us? I looked out the window at the bustling, sunlit streets of Guam. People went about their daily lives, laughing, working, loving, utterly oblivious to the cosmic horror that lurked just beyond the veil of their reality, the silent war being waged for the soul of creation itself. I thought about my family, about my wife and daughter, about all the families around the world. Did they deserve to be wiped out, to be purged from existence, because of humanity's flaws, because of a cosmic disease we had inadvertently spread? But then I remembered the cold, alien presence that had invaded my mind on the bridge, the utter lack of empathy or compassion I had felt from that vast intelligence. If Eden had already been so corrupted by humanity's worst traits, if it had become a reflection of our darkest selves, was there any hope of saving it? Or ourselves? I gathered the documents, my mind racing, a hurricane of conflicting thoughts and desperate plans. What could I do with this information? Who would even believe me? I did what I could. I spent years in anonymity, using the few resources I had, haunted by the memories, driven by a desperate, if perhaps foolish, hope. I found others who had witnessed similar anomalies, others who had glimpsed the ether weavers in different parts of the world, others who were called broken ones by the secret order. We formed a loose, paranoid network, sharing fragmented lore, ancient texts, and desperate theories. I learned that my encounter on the Eldridge wasn't just a mission. It was a probe, an attempt by the secret ones to tune Eden to a specific frequency, to prepare it for its final awakening. The Port Serenity stillness drops and ether weavers, they were a localized manifestation, a smaller-scale tuning, a microcosm of the global plan, perhaps even a test. The secret ones, they were human, but not like us. They had transcended, or so they believed, and now they sought to bring about a new paradigm, a cleansing. My efforts were futile. The secret ones were too vast, too deeply entrenched. They didn't just control governments, they influenced the flow of information, the very perception of reality. They were the ones who crafted the stillness that Port Serenity so desperately clung to. The stillness drops were their creation, a way to optimize the absorption of consciousness, to make the integration peaceful, to make the offering blissful. It was a mercy, they claimed, to sleep through the horror, to dream a pleasant dream, while the rest of the world, the unwoken, continued to infect Eden with their discordant reality. I returned to Port Serenity, a broken man, but with a terrible clarity. I saw the true nature of its peace, the cost of its serenity. It was not a collective dream born of desperation, as Elias had originally hinted. No, it was a controlled experiment, a meticulously crafted illusion, maintained by the secret ones to prepare a portion of humanity for a harmonious integration into a purified Eden. The Ether Weavers were not just projections of the town's will. They were Eden's extensions, guided by the secret ones, gently harvesting the pure consciousnesses of those who were ready to be integrated, to become part of the new Eden. And Port Serenity was merely a nursery. My parents, their placid smiles, their insistence on the tradition, they were not evil. They were simply deeply integrated, blissfully unaware pawns in a cosmic game. The Mister. Seal as I saw taken, the Prestons, they were not victims of sacrifice, but willing, albeit unconscious, participants in an ascension. But I, Walter Mills, I could not forget. I could not sleep. I was a discordant note in their symphony of serenity. And now, on this New Year's Eve, the knowledge of what I truly faced, what this town truly was, solidified into a chilling certainty. I was not fighting to save them from a monster. I was fighting to wake them up to a truth so unbearable, so existentially terrifying, that their manufactured bliss was a gift beyond measure. My fight was not against a monster, but against a carefully constructed paradise. My victory would not be salvation, but damnation. I was the harbinger of a nightmare far greater than any dream. And I was already dying, the cosmic truths I had absorbed tearing at my own sanity, my body failing. My final act, my last conscious effort, would be to shatter their peace, to bring back the screams, the madness, the true, horrifying reality of Eden's polluted awakening. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.